If we could call this to order and stand for the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We could have roll call, Mr. Treasurer, please.
Mrs. Delver.
Here.
Mr. Bauer.
Here.
Mrs. Gray.
Here.
Mrs. Christian.
Here.
Mrs. Walsh.
Here. All right, and then President 24. On to item C, adoption of the meeting agenda.
Second.
So Ms. Gray is first, Mr. Bauer is second. I will make a motion to move out of, to suspend the executive session. Item I, we will not need that this evening. H1, I'm sorry, H1 and I1. Excuse me, both of those to be removed tonight.
Okay, I'm not sure what you said there, so it was talking about motions to lose out, and so could you repeat that, please?
Yes, the motion is to remove executive session, H1, and the reconvening of executive session, I1. We will not need it this evening. Did you say all that? She did, I didn't hear. Okay, cool, thank you.
Go ahead first.
Yeah, first I had Ms. Gray, and second I had Bauer, so we can go on. Please, Mr. Trojan.
Mrs. Delver.
Aye.
Mr. Bauer.
Aye.
Mrs. Gray.
Aye.
Mrs. Christian.
Aye.
And Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to item D, Mr. Superintendent.
The superintendent recommends that the Groveport Madison Schools Board of Education approve the following certificated personnel items, so the consent agenda. I'm sorry, the certified HR report.
Second.
Thank you. I have Ms. Gray is first, Mr. Bauer second. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I do have a question. It says, it has like, 2 stars, and then it says shown as the 23-24 salary subject to change pending negotiations. So this salary is not accurate, is that what that means?
I believe the 2 stars are on there because we have not had the administrative salary schedule for next year approved by the board yet.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Moving forward, roll call. Go ahead, Mr.
Do we need to clarify that note to reference the pending contract? Or is that what we cover?
Okay, so it's noted that it is on, it's in the documentation, so there's no additional note needed at this time. If we can move forward, roll call, please.
Mrs. Delver.
Aye.
Mr. Bauer.
Aye.
Mrs. Gray.
Aye.
Mrs. Christian.
Aye.
And Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Can I make an introduction now?
Sure, thank
I
you.
know this is a work session, but a couple things. Number one, this is important for us because we're in the hiring season. And the other thing is when you bring people in from other districts, you want to be fair to the other district to allow them to transition and get things posted and hire selection. So we worked along, well, I guess I'll do the introduction. Mark Trace is going to be our new Director of Diversity Engagement in Capital. Mark comes to us from Whitehall City Schools, where he's been the Deputy Superintendent for the last 10 years, overseeing HR, among other responsibilities. He brings a wealth of experience and knowledge. He's been a building principal. He spent an entire career in Whitehall, and coming over here, he will help us kind of the experienced, steady hand in our recruiting efforts, in our promotion, working with the association. So we were really happy to have the chance to bring someone with this level of experience and skill, and we'd love to, how we would like to staff both our administrative office and staffing out our building. So, Mark, going to put you on the spot. You want to come up to the mic and introduce yourself? Anything I've left out and say a couple words?
Well, you may have left out the most important part. My daughter and her family live in Groveport, and my grandson is going to be a 2040, calculated that right, 2040 graduate of Groveport, Madison. So I'm very excited. I've had the opportunity to work with Paul. I've known Jamie since, well, a long time ago when we coached basketball against each other. But I've been very excited in this whole move. I've pretty much been in Whitehall my whole career, but I know there's so many other things out there, and I'm super excited to be a part of the team. On the recruiting trips that we've had this year, I've had the opportunity to work with Paul and meet some of the principals, and they seem like some really good educators and very serious in helping our kids here in Groveport do a great job. So, any questions or?
Thank you, welcome on board.
Thank you,
Well,
appreciate it.
We look forward to working with you, sir.
Thank you.
And Mark, I will say this only once, but this is your opportunity. You don't have to stay tonight for the rest of this board meeting, but you'll be here for the rest of them. So appreciate you coming in, but you're welcome to leave.
That's a setup. I'm good.
He thinks it's a test.
He must slaughter.
I appreciate it. Well, congratulations.
Congratulations and thank you all on the board. On to item E, our OSBA in-service presentation presented by Ms. Kenna. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Is my mic picking up okay? I'll make sure. Am I good? Okay. What I want to do tonight is you all should have several materials. You should have an agenda of what we're hoping to cover tonight, a copy of my PowerPoint that I'll be walking through. I noticed a couple typos, so I apologize. I fixed them on this, but gold star if you catch them throughout the presentation in your hard copies. I also have a couple other documents that I'll pull up as well. One of those is an article that I find is very helpful for districts to go back to on effective policy management. My goal is to give you a lot of resources to have on hand to go back and continue to review. And then we also have a document of what I put together for districts that says essential questions for your local policy process. So my goal is twofold. The first is to just go over some of our approach to board policy, a good understanding of how your new policy manual is structured. I know this was a big transition from what you were used to. Answer any questions about that. Make sure that I help you understand how to navigate and access resources on your online site. And then we're gonna get a good understanding of what your manual is like, what lives where, and then transition into what do we do now, right? So how's OSBA gonna tell you what needs updated? What's our process? And then have some conversation around what looks best for Groveport then to review updates as they come out and really govern through policy with the resources available through OSBA. So that's my intent tonight. So we have a full agenda and I look forward to walking through that with you. So I do think that it's helpful as we head into this to have a little context on a question I get a lot. I often get the question on when's a board policy required versus recommended? And I think this is an area that sometimes districts can get out of compliance. The challenge is some districts may see a policy as just recommended and think, I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to change it, okay? An example of that is, you may have chosen to adopt a policy on board staff communications. There's nothing anywhere in law that says you're required to have this policy. However, it's one that is a good policy for the board to have adopted to say, here's what we expect for board staff communications. So that's one that we would say is a recommended board policy, okay? Then there are times where you're required by state or federal law to have a board policy on a topic. Ohio has very clear laws on what's required for your hazing and bullying policies, okay? You're required to have a board adopted policy and procedure. And so as you look at your manual, you're going to have policies in there that are required, and you're going to have some that might have just been recommended. Regardless, if you see updates to a policy, you need to review those to stay compliant, okay? College Credit Plus is another good example. We recommend some pretty detailed information outlining what you're required to do under the College Credit Plus program. That is not required to be a board policy statement, but it's what you as a district are required to do. So if the law changes in that area and you have that board policy, you need to adopt any changes to keep that policy compliant, if that makes sense. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on some board policies are required, some are recommended, and then just look at all of them in light of these recommendations. Yes, go ahead.
So I have a question. So if there's a policy, like the last example that you gave, do you notify us to let us know that, hey, you have this policy and these are the revisions that need to be made?
Yes, yep, and that's the part we'll walk through. That's a great question. So just to really hit this at a little bit of a higher level, so you'll have a little context when we get into the nitty gritty of what this actually looks like for the district, why policies may need change, changes to state or federal law, a local need, guidance from the state agencies. Ohio has a very active legislature in regards to education, so we're often giving you lots of policy updates. My counterparts in other states say, oh, we meet every 2 years. And I was like, that must be nice. Can I come work with you? So that's really why policy changes may be necessary. And then what do you do? So when we recommend a policy, it's going to be one of 3 options. Sometimes it'll be a brand new policy. Sometimes we'll just be revising an existing policy that you already have, or we may be saying you need to get rid of this policy. An example of a removal is when they changed Ohio's home education laws. We had to remove some procedural language that was no longer aligned with that. So there are times now when a policy needs to be removed, you as a board do need to take action to say we are rescinding this from our manual. The majority of the time, you're going to be revising existing policies. But when the legislature decides to say the Board of Education shall adopt a policy on this, then I'm getting texts from people saying, when are we going to have our policy? And that's been happening a little bit more, but that's what's going to happen for policy updates, what they would look like. And we'll see what that looks like in practice. So then, as I said, we're going to work through this as we get to our kind of questions for working through a local process, but I like to have it as a high level. Maybe you notice my first typo here. I had the wrong numbering on the slides on your handouts. I apologize if that caused any confusion. This is where you will then look at the recommended changes compared to your locally adopted policies, include the appropriate subject matter experts, and then ask for help. And as I said, I wanted you to have the high level points, and then we'll hash through this as well. And then policy adoption. This is recommended best practice. It's not typically required unless the statute specifically says you're required to have a hearing before adoption. But we do recommend a first reading at a board meeting and then a subsequent second reading. And we'll talk through all of that in detail as well. And then the next step is policy implementation. Go forth and conquer with the policies, and this is where your administrative team is working to communicate those policies, involving the appropriate stakeholders. So for example, if you update any policies related to your athletic director is going to be making sure those are appropriately communicated and implemented. And then policy is a continual process. You're continuing to review it if it's effective, if the district is still compliant, and then considering any legal, district, and educational climate changes. The other thing that I like to include as kind of a just maybe stop and pause sometimes is, as much as I love board policy, I recognize that board policy isn't always the answer. And so I do like to just give this slide as something to think about. As you look at your employment-related issues, you would need to closely review your collective bargaining agreements. So that's something to look at if you're looking at potentially changing something, to review that to make sure that they align, or that that's something that's within the scope of something you can do through a policy versus the bargaining agreement. Sometimes it's a matter of just better communicating something in a student handbook. So let's say student dress code, for example. Your board policy is pretty general on this, And then usually within the handbooks, it's a little bit more in the weeds on what's actually happening, right? And that might be different for elementary versus high school, but it aligns with the big picture goals of the board policy. The same for employee handbooks. I look at those, both the student, employee, and the district level procedures as more the here's how it's done every day, right? Like in the weeds, the daily implementation, and they all align with board policies, but they're a little bit more nitty gritty detailed. I know my treasurers often have a lot of procedures for how they do their fancy treasurer-ish stuff. So, and then effective, you like that?
That's good.
And then sometimes it's just effective communication, right? So maybe the policies are there, they're great policies, but people don't know about them. So maybe it's a matter of talking through that, making sure there's good communication about the policies, and figuring out what works best based on the audience you're working to target there. So that's my background on board policy. And then what I want to show here, and we'll show this in practice, I'm going to jump to, I'm actually going to use my demo site for the online policy stuff tonight, because I can kind of mess things up and it won't affect your policies, but it will, like, in practice, be the same view you would see. So I give you these slides to help you understand that we use an alphabetical coding section system, and I have some slides later on that are going to go into even more content. But the first letter indicates a chapter. So you have A through L here, the chapters. And then the coding, and it's a little squishy, I'm sorry. But basically when you look at the policy code, and this is similar to what you had before with Neola, but now it's letters. So you just have to get your mind past that. But the first letter, every policy is going to have a code to it. And that's the main identifier. And that code is critical for staying current with updates as well. So the first letter of that indicates the chapter that it lives in. The second letter is the major category, and then it's subcategories from there. So I give you this example up here on non-discrimination. I like using this one. You have AC. So chapter A is your foundations and basics commitment, right? Like we're committed to non-discrimination. And so you have AC, which is non-discrimination, and then a type of that is obviously sex discrimination. So ACA is non-discrimination on the basis of sex, and then ACAA is sexual harassment, and then ACAA-R are your sexual harassment procedures. So this is something that definitely is different than how you manage some of these things before. So now if you have procedural language, it appears within there in the same section the policy does, with the -R after the code. So that's a little bit of a shift, and you'll begin to get used to that. And hopefully as I pull up your online site or my fake online site and walk through that, that'll help make sense there as well. The reason I say that is if you have a policy, you need to look and see if there's an accompanying regulation or procedure as well. They really go hand in hand for implementation. Hazing and bullying is another good example of that. You have some policy information that's like, here's what the definition of bullying is, it's prohibited, and then the procedure is going to say, here's what happens if a complaint's filed. And so in that case, your hazing and bullying policy is JFCF, and then the regulation is JFCF-R. So this I give to you as a resource to have, and I won't go through it in too much detail because I want to get into some more conversation in this area too, but I have found that this is helpful, and this is helpful, I would say, to share with administrators too, as they're just trying to figure out what lives where. So section A, I highlighted some of the things there. As a board, a lot of what governs your operations is in section B. So as you're becoming familiar with the manual and you're trying to figure out where to maybe start, that would be a good place to look at for all your board operations, and review that section. It's one of the little shorter ones too. GI and J, don't start with them, they're the longest. C, general administration. I joke that this is actually one of my shortest sections because it talks about the superintendent and they have to do everything else in the manual. So we give them a short section here. Section D is our fiscal management. Mr. Collier actually came from an OSBA policy district. And I know they were like some of our little unicorns in the wild for policy. So they always did a great job with policy. So definitely rely on his expertise and how OSB writes those fiscal policies as well. Section E is where you have your support services. So I look at these as things that would include safety, your food service programs, and technology. Those are some of the key areas that live within here, and transportation. So, this is a good place for your director of operations to take a look at and review those. And, I'll say in this area, I know we took a lot of time in that safety area as well, based on your local conversations. Section G, personnel. One of the things that I had on a prior slide, I'm going to jump to real quick. So this is a shift to your personnel policies all now live in one section. So previously, I think you had maybe 3, one for administrators, one for certified, one for classified. So our approach to this is to put those in section G. And if a policy starts with a GA or a GB code, it applies to all personnel. So these are things that are implemented the same regardless of classification. So that might be your drug-free workplace, your Family Medical Leave Act, and then where statute dictates a different process, that's when they split out. So it's when the law then begins to say, here's the process for contracts for teaching employees or certified staff. Those are in the GC category, and then GD, those apply to your classified staff. Okay, and that's clear in the titles as well. But just so you know, like that first section of section G is all personnel, and then it breaks it down based on classification. It does help avoid some duplication rather than having to have the same policy the exact same way 3 places. So the next one, I missed section H. Section H is negotiations. It's really short because most of that stuff is defined in your contract. I apologize, that's not on that slide there. So section I is instruction. So I think about this as the instructional programs of the district and the operation of such programs, including your extracurriculars. So this is where you're going to see information on grading, graduation requirements, teaching about religion, parent and family involvement, English learners, textbooks, instructional materials, okay? Things that go into the instructional program. And then I gave you some more examples. So I gave you 2 slides on this one because there's a lot of examples there. Then section J, students, I like to look at this as how students are to conduct themselves and interact with the district. So this is where you're going to see language on admission, which includes your protections for students who are experiencing homelessness, attendance, student conduct, hazing and bullying, interrogations, discipline, suspension, student records. So that's what's in section J. Like I said, those are pretty heavy bites to chew. They're longer, but that's kind of that world that covers there. Section K is your school community relations section. You're going to have some information here on community use of school premises, for example, public complaints, and then relations with those support organizations or parent booster organizations. And then section L is where you have some general language on interactions with other schools or educational entities, and then some language usually on student teachers there. Okay, so I'm going to I gave you in here for your reference a couple screenshots, but I'm going to actually go live on this so that we can walk through that more effectively. So if you'll give me 1 second, I'm going to change. And any questions on things so far? Okay, so this is my demo site that I want to walk through with you. So I just want to take a couple minutes to navigate the online policies. And then, as I said, if something breaks, it's my demo. But this is similar to yours. Anybody would go on that policies tab and they're going to see your policy manual on the left. I strongly recommend that you take advantage of the search feature to find something. Not everybody has all the policy codes memorized off the top of their heads. So I definitely encourage you to use that tool, and then it'll give you some examples where that comes up and you can jump to that individual policy. One of the things that I really like about our online policy site is we provide you with the citation or the links to the legal citations as well. This is really helpful as well if you have, an administrator who's working with a parent who's trying to understand the requirements of the law. They can say, hey, here's where those requirements come from. Here's what's required as it relates to this area. It also will allow you as board members to become more familiar with the legislative requirements around policies as well. So I really like that we have that. I don't know if you had that before.
I was just saying it's important power. We didn't have that.
We had it listed, but we didn't have it.
It wasn't a hyper thing.
Right.
Yes. So take advantage of that. That's a great tool to use. Another thing is you're going to have some cross-reference links. I will be candid with you that we are finalizing those on your site because we ran into some technical glitches with board docs. But those are going to be on there that would link to that cross-referenced policy.
You
So-
can make a message when that's done.
Yes. Yep, I will do that. And I apologize. We had a way that would work and then it stopped working on me. So, but a cross-referenced policy is another policy that might be impacted by a change to one or might give you some more information in a certain area. There we go, I'll make that a little. Another thing that I find extremely helpful is the ability to share individual policies. So if you click on this little share icon, the nice thing with that is if you click the link to share, then when you go to that link, it takes you directly to the most current active policy of that exact policy code, okay? So for example, you're required to have certain posting notices for your sexual harassment policies and procedures. You can use that link, or if you have a parent you're working with, or the auditors, you can say, here's the link, and it'll direct them to that. So it makes it a little bit more easy. Going back to that, we want to make sure we're effectively communicating policies. So that's a great tool there as well. And then this is where I talked about we have the policy codes. So those are up there at the top. You can see your historical dates on there as well. See when it was last adopted and when it was last revised. So if you're ever like, well, what did our policy say before then? Or one little context on why it was changed. So that is how to navigate the policies, and all this is available on the public side. You can also then just, the general toggling and navigating through. Now the other side is where I want to walk through what the process is and how OSBA helps you stay current and some of the additional resources that you have in your site. So this information, you would need to be logged into your board doc site and access it in the password protected area. So one of those things that you would have some access to is when the board adopts a new policy and we update it on your site for you, we're going to archive and we're going to move to this retired area a copy of the policy as it existed at that time. Okay, so that can be really helpful. Let's say you have a student conduct issue that's based on a policy that was in place at one time, and you need to go back and see what it was because the infraction was based on that policy. You would have access to view that in that retired area. We do keep that in that password protected area to avoid any confusion, right? Like you don't want people wondering which policy is the most current. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. Same thing if there's like an audit and they want to know what policy was in place at a certain time, you have access. Another thing is you have access to this tab called OSBA Training Resources and Workflows. Some of this is, I would say, more in the weeds than you're going to need in your role. But one of the things is we have provided these resources for this your administrative staff who will be helping on the actual technical side of it. And that's something we'll set up some one-on-one training as well. But that's all in there. And then the article that I shared with you, I did zhuzh it. That's my technical policy term for you all a little bit. But the base of it is also in there as a document that we'll walk through. So just know you have those things available for you as well. So how does OSBA tell you what needs change? That's my next topic. But before I do that, I want to see if you have any questions on the overall policy manual structure before we segue into the what do we do now that we have this beautiful new manual. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So OSBA releases updates to our subscribers every quarter. Typically, those are usually every February, May, August, and November. That can change based on what's happening. Usually, if it's a budget bill year, I don't get things out until September. It's usually not August. I was excited that this was a leap year because I could release something on February 29th and I didn't have to change it to a March issue. One of the nice things is we have the ability to do kind of special releases if we need to as well. So the new Title IX regs dropped. Okay, we're not going to have those ready in May. There's no way. And we're not going to wait until August, right? So we have the ability to push out a special summer release or whenever to say, hey, here's something you need to look at. But I would plan to have something to review every, 4 times a year, every quarter. And so what we do just to create this information and walk through that process is we review bills that pass. So we're consistently reviewing recommendations, changes to law, changes to case law to say, what do we need to worry about? What's going to have an impact on our OSBA sample policies? So we write this newsletter, and I think that it's very beneficial for you to review the articles so you know the context on the policy changes you would be considering. And then also it helps increase your knowledge of what the new requirements of schools are. Another thing you're going to see here that I encourage you to take advantage of is we do provide a free webinar with each newsletter release. So we will, within the newsletter, say, hey, here's the webinar date if you want to sit on live. And then if you're not able to participate, we do post that for recording, or we post that recording for later viewing, so you can go if you'd rather listen to it there. So you can see that we provide various articles on the changes. This issue, for example, we had an update on the changes to recreational marijuana and policy implications to that, and then some additional changes on some home-educated student extracurriculars. You have access to the last 4 issues at a time, and then they kind of get turned off on your end, just so that you're not getting confused on which one's the most current, right? So you have access to 4 of those. The nice thing is you got all the fun budget bill changes in there when you adopted, so you didn't have to deal with those. That was a huge issue. So along with each newsletter, we also provide you with sample policy recommendations. And that's where I want to really make sure you're clear on what those recommendations look like, what we address in those, and what that then means for you as you look at your locally adopted policies. This is something that we are working to set up a training for you all. I know that my assistant Ronnie has been in contact with you and working to get that set up for sure when it works best with schedules, but basically just the technical board docsy side of it to even get the drafts ready for the board to consider. So, and we have a lot of support there if you need any help on that. So I'm not going to get in the weeds on that side of it. What I want to show you is how to look at the recommendations as it relates to your local policies. So I'm going to go into my draft policies tab here, and I'm going to show you how things would come over as changes. And let me just, I'm sorry, tell me if my screen is not showing well for you or if it's the view showing okay. So when we release our updates, we do classify them into these main categories. So as I said, most of the policies are usually a revised policy, not usually a new one, but June is a good example here. So June, we had a couple things. So we had the June PDQ. We actually had a recommendation to rescind something, okay? So we had that in there as a section to basically say, get rid of this language if you had it, okay? And that came from the June newsletter that we had released. Then we have some that are revised requiring district customization. This is an important flag for you to look at. So there are times where you can customize a policy, where you have a choice. There's times where you're just stuck with it and that's what the law requires and you can't do anything with it. Our goal is to help make it clear to you, if there's a choice you have to make, that you make that choice, okay? I would say that this is one of the largest growth areas for some of our districts, if I can just say that, is making sure that if there's a choice that needs to be made, you're making that choice prior to adoption, okay? So if going back to the Family Medical Leave Act, we push out an update and there's 4 12-month periods to look at, you need to make sure before the board adopts it, you pick the one that applies to you, right? And so that's why we have tried as much as possible to say, you need to really make sure you're customizing this. And then within the body of the policy, we're going to tell you the sections that need updated, right? Or that are needing customization. So usually it's in like italics here, which says customize. Sometimes it's a pick this or this, but we do provide indicators in there where you need to make sure there's a choice. You may already have made this choice within your local policies, and you may say, hey, that's still current practice, we're good to go, okay? So that's something to definitely review in those that are requiring district customization. And then you have these ones that are just revised. So sometimes there's lots of revisions, sometimes there's a few. And so I'm gonna just use this one here as an example of how you know what's changing. So we use the approach of doing red and strike through for language we're recommending removing, and green and bold for language that we're recommending adding to your policies as the new or adopted language. So what happens when OSBA pushes out this update? Your goal is to say, what does this mean for our local policy, JED, student absences and excuses, okay? And so, Libby, I believe it was you said, how do we know if we have a policy? This is where the tools of the system, when there's a new newsletter released, there's a tool that you use to copy over both our recommendations as well as your most current active policy at the same code. So you would know. So in this case, there's a JED, and then if you go down to section J, you're gonna see that there's a policy JED there, and it says copy of in the title. That means you have that policy. So if you have that policy, you need to look at the changes, right? You need to say, what do we need to do to align with these recommendations? And then that's the technical side that we're working through on just the little drag and drop, whatever, to even get those initial drafts ready to discuss with the board and whatever process we work through there moving forward. So there's a little bit of some technical steps, but we give you those tools to know that you have that policy, that code, and therefore that you need to make the changes. We are very clear in there about whether language is permissive. So if something's permissive, we'll say this is permissive language. If you don't want it, then don't add it to your policy, right? Or you might look at it and say, well, we had this, but maybe we don't want it anymore. Maybe we want to remove it. Some examples on that are like extracurricular participation, where you can allow non-resident home educated students to play here in certain situations in sports. That would be an example of something permissive, right? So we would clearly indicate that.
So, wait,
Yes, go ahead, please do.
So when it gets to this point, that's when the policy committee is the one that goes through this, correct?
So we're gonna,
Am I?
no, you're good. I think that's part of what we want to walk through too, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll let you go on.
No, you're good, because some of the, our goal with allowing you as a board to govern through policy is help you be able to focus your time on those areas where you have a choice, right? So some of those things that are compliance, where it's a matter of we need to get this language in here because they changed the law on home educated kids and we can't require them to get approval anymore. The getting the drafts together and bringing them to the board for discussion, there's really not much that you can change there, right? And so that's one of the things I think we want to talk through today as we go through this process is making sure that if there's questions in some of those policies that you as board members have, you have those addressed, but then also be respectful of all the time you put in as board members to not have to go in, fully in all the weeds to make sure you're going through every version. But pull in the subject matter experts in certain areas. So do some, Family Medical Leave Act, for example, make sure your HR person provides input there as you do that initial research to be prepared to discuss those recommendations with the board. And so that's the part that I think it's going to vary based on the policy and the content and what's being changed to figure out what works best, to your point about who's going to kind of do what where. And I will say that that's probably, it sometimes changes based on what policy changes are being released, right? And you may have identified certain topics that for you as a board, you want to do that initial first pass too, right? But I have found as I've worked with districts that they will often rely on their subject matter experts in that area to even begin to put together those initial copies with this technical side to be prepared to discuss with the board. And then also see those newsletters and understand the background there as well. So that is the PDQ release. You will receive an e-alert, a newsletter from OSBA, an email. It usually comes from my email address I'm the lucky one because then I get all the bounce backs when somebody's on vacation and I have to get reminded that I'm not at the beach, they are. But that'll usually come from me saying this policy development quarterly newsletter is ready for review. And then it tells you to go and log into your board doc site to access it. So then you would go log in and you're going to be able to view all that information there. So that is how OSBA high level gives you those recommendations, right? To all our districts, to all our online clients. We're going to give you that newsletter. You're going to use the copy all into drafts. You're going to judge your local language as much as you can. And then the next step is working through what process then works best for your district to review those changes and work through the board adoption process. I'm just looking at my little agenda here. I think we're on to, I think I've gone 1 through 3. And now I want us to segue into that number 4 on the agenda, which is talking through then what that looks like for you in Groveport on this new process moving forward. So before we do that, questions on the big picture process and how OSBA tells you, here's what you need to do.
I don't have any questions, but I think it's great that you sent a notice and all OSBA members get that quarterly update, because I think we'll be on the way to get it, so it'll show up inside, it's just time to review with the red line, strike through, or green language is needed. So I think it's great that, we all, anyone has access to it if they choose to go to the OSBA website, log into their account, those type of things.
Yeah.
I think that's great. That's amazing.
Thanks. Yeah, and it is something that not everybody gets just because they're OSBA membership. So you get that through your subscription to the online policy site. And so, yeah, no, I'm just, so it's helpful too. Like it's a selling point for us sometimes. I'm like, well, you want to know what works with policy, then yeah. But yes, it is. And then, but yeah, I think this is helpful. That is something that is different. We do not come to your district and tell you every release what needs changed, okay? So that's a big shift from what you were doing before. We, just to be candid, we have a very different service model, I think, than your prior provider with staffing. There's myself and one other consultant, and actually, after fighting for 12 years to be able to expand and grow, we're going to be hiring a 3rd person in our area. So we're excited about that and additional opportunities that'll bring. But, we have found that these newsletters and the webinars are helpful. And then, the other thing is we don't do anything unless you tell us you've done something, right? Like we're not going to automatically go in here. We notify you, and then it's on the district to say, all right, what are we going to do to review it? So, and then if you adopt policies, to notify us, because if you don't notify us, we don't know that you've adopted them, right? So just highlighting some things I know that we've had maybe some challenges with there. So making sure that's clear. Other questions, Jamie?
Yes, so can you explain to us how the sample or required policy get developed when it comes to us?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So what happens when a new policy is revised? So we review the legislation to determine what the impact is on OSBA's sample policies. And sometimes we may have to change 5 policies for one change. This is where the articles are critical because they will tell you, based on this guidance, here's what we need to change. So an example I like to use is the levy FAQs and how they said, here's what's allowable for operations or for when you have a levy on the ballot. So this article here, Auditor of State Levy Guidance, within there then says, here's the policies that we're changing because of this. And we also will tell you the why there. So what we did in that case, when this Auditor of State Levy Guidance came out, we combed through that guidance, and then we looked at all our policies that touched any of these topics: dress code, time, materials, okay? So we looked at our base OSBA sample language, and we said, what do we need to change to align with this guidance here? So then those policies that we released, and let me see, like I said, this is my demo. So let me go back here. Hang on, sorry. This was a long one. All right, I got a long scroll here. I'm telling you, those budget bills kill me. So these are all, this is all the policies we had to change in September.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun.
September this past year.
Yeah.
So we missed
You-
it because of all the.
Everything was put in as part of the project, so I know.
I remember some years that we
Yeah.
had like
Yep.
30 that we had to review, and
Yeah,
they
it's,
were thick, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, we had to do that
Yeah.
before.
yeah. And I do think too, that's one of the benefits to releasing updates quarterly versus twice a year is usually, unless it's a budget bill or lame duck session, usually, which is, every year at some point then, usually it's more manageable.
Yeah.
But so in this case then, the levy guidance, we had said within there that we needed to make changes to staff dress and grooming. Like I said, this is my demo, so if it doesn't work here, I apologize. I'll try it again. Oh, okay. So you can see then, this is what we changed to the OSBA sample. We also make it clear, this is OSBA sample language, right? So we went through, we reviewed our base language, and we decided that we needed to make the adjustments to say, instead of just saying assigned to district duty, say acting in their official capacity, and then add a statement based on guidance and case law there to refrain from wearing political buttons, pins, or t-shirts. So that's what we do. We review legislation, we review guidance and say, what's the impact on policy? Another thing that we have changed, which I think is very helpful, we provide you with a form with each PDQ release that is one of the tools that you will use for submitting back to us the information once the board has adopted it. And that's also a tool I think we could talk through using effectively when we're working through any questions. But we have started to include a summary on that form of why the changes are needed to that policy. So this is what I recommend using as a starting point for your prep and then working through as a board as you review the changes. So you can see this once again is the September one, but these are all the policies that we have changes to. And in that column, the recommendation summary, we're telling you a high level summary of why we had to make the change. So, the home education changes, when they changed that law, actually had a trickle down effect into like 6 or 7 policies. This one, you can see GVCC and GVG and GVI. We said this is based on the new guidance from that. So, Jamie, does that help you give a little bit more context on how we do that and review that?
Yep, and I guess, I assume at some point there's legal review.
So we work with our in-house legal team. As you know, OSBA does not give official legal advice. We give you policy advice. That's my statement I always give.
Right, not legal advice, but the policy advice has been reviewed by legal.
We work with our legal team on those updates. Yes, thank you. So this is a really helpful tool, and this is one of the things that I think can be a good springboard for you all as you move forward on updates too. Other questions on the overall process?
Are there items that we, when we went through I was here, but when the board went through the process, are there items that they modify from your standard language?
Yes, yeah. And so one of the things when the board adopted the new manual that I provided was a summary report that highlighted some of those key areas of customization. So if you're looking for some history on where Groveport had customized to you, that's a good tool to go, a good resource to go to as well. And I can confirm if it's, usually once we finish a project, we clean all the old documents out of there so that you're not confused by everything. But I archive everything on my end. So I can see if that summary report is still accessible in your board docs, or if not, make sure that I share a copy of that with you, if anybody needs that as well. That was that, yeah, it kind of,
It was also not attached to our board docs, because we went over it multiple times.
yes.
And I wanna make sure, it should, that's why I'm just making sure we're speaking of the exact same thing that
Yeah.
is accessible to everyone.
And yeah, and it would have been, and so yeah, it was, I think it looks, let's see.
Yeah, but it's an Excel file, right?
There was an Excel, and then this was what highlighted some of, yeah, yep. So, because I know you can't, this is your first term on the board, exciting way to start your year, correct? So I know you weren't a part of these discussions, so if you're looking for some historical context on those conversations, this would definitely be a good resource.
So that would be the November 2023 meeting, was the December 2023 meeting on our board docs website.
Thank you.
Mr. Kirshen, also from a frame of reference, and Seth, you were there, I think most of the changes, when we didn't go with OSBA policy, we did a side-by-side comparison from our previous to our new, and so we assessed which one we preferred. And so, gosh, I don't remember, I won't say that we didn't do any, but I don't remember just going off and writing a bunch of new language. I think it was kind of, did we like the OSBA proposed, or do we like some version of what we had in the previous policy?
Yeah.
That's what I remember as well, as in
Yeah.
like a either or and pick one, so.
Yeah.
And that's what I recall with the, when we had our discussion.
Yes.
That was brought up about the review of our previous
Yeah.
writing with her.
Yeah.
And that no legal counsel was a part of our
Yes.
discussions
Yep.
as well,
Yep.
which we mentioned that as well. So we
Yeah.
had someone there to ensure that they gave legal advice.
Yes.
They didn't give policy advice, they gave us the legal advice.
Yes.
We were saying.
And then I do think too, one of the things that if there are, going back to if a policy has a choice to be made, you should have already made that choice, so it's confirming it's still current, right? You may not need to do anything with that part. And so definitely working through that and not losing your local customization. And so making sure you look at that as well. Other questions on the overall process and how we provide updates before we talk through some considerations for how you all locally want to work through that. Okay, so the document essential questions for your local policy review process. This is something that I often give to districts who are trying to figure out, well, what do we do locally, okay? And so this, I think, is a good way for us to walk through what you want to do. So the first is, we already talked about, you already should know the answers to the questions about how are the necessary policy updates communicated to the board. I would say that you should all be receiving that notice from us, that the PDQ is ready. And then what I can do as well, Jamie, is if you want me to confirm which of your administrators are on that email list, I can. So if there's additional administrators, that would be helpful to have them on there. I will pull a report of who's currently receiving it. And then I'm assuming they would all have the appropriate board docs permissions to get in as well. But I will make sure that we confirm administrators who are receiving. By default, we subscribe board members, superintendent, and treasurer. It's kind of the standard, and then work to add additional people if you need to. Even if you're not getting the email though, as long as they have to log into board docs, that's what would give them access there. So those are some things. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is maybe a board docs question, but since you mentioned that it's in board docs, is there a notification system like?
That would be nice.
Okay. I'm a tech person, so that's why. Well, isn't there's like a little bell or something that says, say if you missed the PDQ email, if you're not able to, you missed it there, at least it catches you again in board.
That would be nice.
So that's a no.
That is correct. It's a
Thank
no. Yes.
Okay.
We're on the same page. I've asked for that, but no. Board docs, the system doesn't have the notifications built in. So that's why we have to send the e-alert to tell you to go to your board doc site. Good question. So I think where I'd like to go here with 1D is jump down to 1D, and that is, what's your plan then, right? So what is your plan, and working through that when a PDQ is released to figure out what the next steps are to taking it to the board. And so I want to share what I've seen with some districts as kind of best practice and then talk through that. What I have found is that usually when the alert goes out, there's a district administrator who gets to be the policy guru, right? Who loves policy, and that's their main, they're the main one focused on that from an administrative standpoint. And so usually what happens is when a PDQ comes out, that administrator is then saying, okay, maybe it's time to schedule a meeting to review these. Let's start the technical side of it. I don't know if Ms. Cook will be your person doing this because she's already your board docs guru. But usually the first step in that plan is to get all those policies in there and start prepping them to pull in the customization to your local language to then say, okay, we're ready to discuss this. While that's happening, what I encourage my board members to do is to go ahead and start reading those newsletters. So you can already become familiar with what's going to be changing and take advantage of sitting in on those webinars as well. Go ahead, did you have a question?
I'm going to just cross-walking everything. So you have the PDQ email, then there's, I should say, several other emails that we get their honor. And they also reference like things that are pending or kind of may happen or is being discussed. And then we eventually see it flow over.
Yeah.
So there's another way for us to kind of pre-prep, I would like to say.
Yeah.
From what am I following?
Yeah, so like our legislative emails,
Yes, the
for
legislative
example.
update,
Yeah.
and then you have the PDQ,
Yeah.
legislative, and then the
Yeah.
final there, so we get almost kind of like 2 notifications
Yes.
from OSBA, where you're telling us it's coming, then you
Yes.
tell us when it's here,
Yes.
and then we tell you what we did, and then
Yes.
you tell us
Yep.
that it's updated.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's a good way to even have like background information earlier. So, and then, I will say that our legislative, legal, and policy teams, we meet together like probably every 2 weeks just to see what's going on. To that note too, we are providing suggestions to our lobbyists on what's going to maybe make the legislation less painful from a policy perspective. A big thing right now is the cell phone policy push. So we're actually it was interesting on that. They, in the original language, had added an entire new code section, but there's already law that allows the board to restrict cell phones. So part of the conversation was, let's work to have that align, right? So working through that. But yes, there's a lot of background information. So I think that's one of the conversations is, I do think there's benefit to, well, I know it's the board policies, having a district staff member who's the policy point person, just for then, if there's some additional research that needs done either internally or through OSBA, there's a good point person to gather information to then take back to the board for review. So I'm not sure if that's anything you all have had a conversation on or want to have or something kind of pending there. But that's I would say, a big part of the process here as well. In that plan for review of updates. Who do you contact if you have questions? Once again, if you can reach out to me. I'm happy to take your questions. My contact information is in that presentation, and then you can reach me at OSBA. I think I have my direct dial line on there. I do. So that will find me, whether I'm working from home or I'm working from the office. And then my email address. I'm always happy to take any questions you have. And then sometimes, you may just have a question on how a policy is being implemented in the district. Definitely reach out to whoever you've decided is the key administrator, who's kind of your point person there. But definitely reach out if you have questions about your policies or procedures. And then another question I encourage you to just make sure you're effectively doing is how your policies are communicated to your stakeholders. I think that as you head into the new school year, this will be a good opportunity to work through that communication through handbooks as well, right? Like you kind of had this little bit of a mid-year shift and communicated updates, but that'll help too. I would say as much as you can be specific on a specific policy code to do that. So when you talk about student suspension, make it clear that parents need to know they look at policy JGD to understand what suspension process is. So I would just take some time to think through that and what you're doing. I know you have it on your board doc site, obviously, and work through that. And then one of the things I believe you formalized in your policy is that you do want to, as much as possible, have a first read and then adopt at a subsequent meeting. And I will cheat sheet here. I will just make sure that I go to your policies now. Hang on. I'm not going to edit anything, I promise. So your policy on policy development is policy BF. And you stated that policies introduced and recommended to the board should not be adopted until a subsequent meeting in order to permit further study. However, the board may adopt policies at the first meeting they are presented to address emergency conditions or special events. Be prepared for that with Title IX. I had a conversation with the district about that today, to be candid, right? Like, I mean, you've got those rules unless they get, stayed or anything, take effect August 1. We're serving through 1,500 pages of rule and commentary. So we will do the best we can, but to be candid, I can't guarantee you're gonna have time for 2 readings, right? So, and regardless of whether you like it, it's the law, you know what I mean? Like, it's one of those areas. So that's why this language is in there. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a day requirement? Like, can you have one, like, tonight you do the first reading, and then next Wednesday you do another reading? There's no 30-day windows.
Correct. No. Yeah, so unless a statute specifically says you must have a hearing, then you can there's no requirement for you to even have multiple readings. We recommend it as best practice though, right? And so that's why the language is crafted here the way it is. And then if there is a policy that has a specific notice or hearing time frame, we would communicate that through the PDQ. Good question. It's not like your calendar hearing where it has to be exactly 30 days, not 29, not 28.
Exactly.
Yes, good question. So, as far as you work through the planning process and when you're gonna look at those updates in your plan, if you have multiple readings, you wanna walk through, okay, obviously we'd like to have this adopted around when the bill takes effect, right? So typically bills take effect within 90 days. Unless there's an emergency clause. And so usually by rolling things out on a quarterly basis, we're able to give you time for those 2 readings. But that does tie into kind of that, what's our plan when a PDQ comes out. So I do have some districts in that regard who have said, we're gonna just put policy on as a discussion item every June. Okay, so knowing that OSBA typically releases an update in May, to say, hey, in June, we're gonna plan to have a policy discussion. And maybe you end up not having it or an initial review, but that way you can kind of plan if you're thinking about when you'd handle policy. So if you think about that for timing, I do not recommend that you just sit and wait, personally. So I have had some districts that say, I don't wanna meet every quarter. I want to just wait and look at them all once a year or twice a year. Okay.
We only.
Or once every 2 years.
No. So that's good. See, I love that look. Yes. No. Because the challenge with that is sometimes a policy will change multiple times in a year. So then you're like, well, what was this change? And did we miss this change? So if you can just plan to review them as soon as they're released, it's going to be much easier for
And
you.
that's been normally our practice, at least since I've been on the board. I'll ask Ms. Libby, I know she's very important.
Great.
When they would come out with Neola, we wouldn't even
Great.
wait, it was immediately.
What you're saying is not showing up, so could you repeat that, please?
I said our policy, let me know if you can see it, Kathy.
Yep.
Is it good now? Okay. I'll make sure I'm like this, so that way I think that's probably what it is, I was probably too far. Our practice in the past, at least since I've been here, is that when a policy was upcoming for review, we looked at it immediately, it was added to the agenda. We had our first read and then brought it back the next meeting for the second read. So it wasn't waiting on any special committee or anything like that, it was an immediate read, so we can get those things addressed timely and we could be in compliance with whatever law. And if we were close to it, I think sometimes we would maybe have a special meeting. I don't even think that's happened, but I know we would if we needed to have it come back immediately just to vote on it.
Great.
And we haven't waited.
Good, thank you. That's what I like to hear. So that's good.
And for those, since our board policy says for those laws that need emergency stuff, is there anything you can do ahead of time to say, all right, we're just doing one read on this, so it's an emergency, or would you guys give us like?
I would say from to be handled like a transparency standpoint, if you're like, here's why we're not having 2 readings, I think that goes a long ways, right?
So like
So
have a statement of some
Yeah.
sort to articulate the reason and that it goes in effect
Yeah.
on this date, therefore
Yeah.
we need to vote on
Yeah.
this meeting in order to be in compliance.
correct. And there's nothing in your policy that would require that or in law unless something else applies, but I do think it just helps to be clear on why you're maybe not having multiple readings of it. Yeah.
That's a good question.
All right, so one of the things that I like to walk through with districts too is I have some districts who like a committee approach to this, and I have some districts who don't. So I think this is one of the things to work through as well is how the board wants to review the changes and work through the initial information to kind of get those things finalized to be comfortable with what you want to adopt. And so I think it varies by district. I have some boards who, the majority of the board members want to really be in the weeds on every single discussion about policy. And I say in that case, then, have it as part of a special board meeting conversation. And so I think it's a matter of what's going to allow you to most effectively work through that process. And there's no, I don't have a percentage. Like I said, I've seen districts do this both ways. So I don't know if you all have had any thoughts working through that and what your thoughts are on how you as a board want to be engaged in that. Knowing that, like I said, up front, I recommend that the administrators do some legwork initially to prep those documents. And then what we recommend is even just use that form that we gave you to then walk through the recommendations and understanding them and make any choices you need to. And so I think it's a matter of figuring out if you want that part, right, the walking through the choices and everything to be done by a committee of the board or by, at a special board meeting. So I don't know if you've had any thoughts on that.
So if I can start where we were before. Previously, with the previous provider, the consultant would come in and my executive assistant and I would be there, and oftentimes Paul and the treasurer, and then depending on the topics, we might bring in other people, but we would go through, and then this is a required thing to do, we talk about each one, hear different options, we'd have some discussion about what's going on, what are many districts doing and choosing, and things like that. After that, if other people needed to see it, we would do that internally, and then the completed document with the recommendation would go to the board in advance for the first read. And when they were very voluminous, I think we did them like weeks in advance to give people time to read for the first read. Then we would have feedback at the first read and maybe some edits, and then do the second read for approval.
Okay.
When we switched to OSBA, part of my fear was that we weren't going to have the consultant that we have that's kind of holding our hand. And so I suggested that we do a policy committee. And sometimes there's the unintended consequences that you don't think about. So we had it, we only had the one, or we had two others that we brought, but we had the one required policy. And the thing that became evident to me was I didn't have my assistant there, so we weren't able to make changes live. And if we had to check, because the meeting was in the evening, and so if we needed to talk to the curriculum and instruction people or different things like that, we didn't have the expertise there and available to answer some of the why. Now, this was our first meeting, and so, we didn't have any practice down yet, but we really, and I'll look to the other people there, we kind of spun our wheels for about an hour and 15 minutes and never really accomplished anything. And another unique thing that happened is we had outside participants come in and they were actively participating in the board policy meeting and debating that something might be a change in working condition or something like that. And that was a really odd dynamic
Okay.
that we were talking about board policy, and it almost felt like negotiations in
Okay.
some way. So it really, again, we had two policies that we brought forward. We had the one sample regulation, which is, I think, required, and it's just name changes in it. It wasn't very productive,
Okay.
and that's with one, and I know we would get better at time, but I also worry about when we have 40 changes.
Yes.
What's the practical side of that without having some of the content experts there to do that?
Yeah, and that context is really helpful for me to know so that we can say, hey, how can we help you work through this next time? So here's what I would recommend is I would take a similar approach to how you did on your prior provider, where you did some of that initial draft first. So get the language ready, pull in, identify your curriculum people if you need to, and do that research to then have the conversation with the board. The other thing is, while, like I said, we are not going to be able to come here, as you're prepping those, ask me questions, right? So one of the things that I would consider doing, and this is one of the suggestions that I actually do this a lot with my ESCs and my career centers, because things are so different for them sometimes based on what they do. But what I have found works well if districts have questions on edits. Sometimes they're like, do I really have to do this? Or can I zhuzh it this way? One thing that can work well when you're doing some of that initial prep, if that's the route you want to go, is once this form is in there, you can do what you want with it, right? So, and then we see it on our end. So every time you get a PDQ, you get this update review form. So what I often recommend districts do is to make some revisions to that form. I'm back in my demo site, so I'm not messing up yours. But you could actually go in here and you could add a column, and you could say questions for OSBA, and you get to see me like. So then you could go through, and even just in your initial prep, right? And if you're unclear on something, you could just say, do I really have to do this? Or something like that, right? Or we're unclear. Then I could go in here and provide you with some input and some feedback. Like I can just add another column then, right? To just say, I put it in the wrong place, but feedback from OSBA, okay? I promise, I can't see this very well. Okay, so then I could go in, I could respond, I could give you some feedback, you then could review that. That's why I typically recommend having an administrator assigned so we can have that, communication. I can update that for you. I think that's a great tool. So I would encourage you to go through that as you have questions, or you may even use that for yourself. You may even decide that, no, if before you ask, we don't have the ability to assign policies to different people to review. That would be nice as well. But as you're going through this internally, and you and Ms. Cook are prepping, you could say, basically who needs to review? And I'm in the wrong place, but you could say transportation, something like that. So you could by policy kind of use that as a good tool to get things ready to then take to the board for discussion, get that legwork done. And then, it sounds like before it worked well for you all to do that. And then obviously if there's anything you need to pull in input from other parties, figure that out. But it sounds like based on how you operated in the past, a similar approach might work. Yeah.
Yeah, the way that it was done with Neola that I really liked it was that on that first read, you would have the policies, but then Neola provided that summary document that explains, okay, this is why this policy needs to be changed. This is the area that it needs to be changed. It sounds like you guys have the same thing.
It was just done by us.
Yeah, so, but how the document
So,
that was sent
yeah,
to us,
yeah.
it gives us the update.
Yeah, so this form, this update review form by code, it does give you a brief description of the why it needs changed, the recommendation summary, And then if you want more detail, you would go to the actual newsletter.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
so we get the newsletter, so
Correct.
personally, I like that, because that, on that first read, then I'm looking at not only policy that has been looked at and the choices have been made, or if there are no choices, just the policy itself, and showing the markouts, but then it also, I've got the backup that says, okay, this is the reason why we're doing this change. And I would like to continue to do it that way.
And then have that discussion, so the
Yeah.
initial legwork is
Yeah,
done.
it's done by.
And then as a board at that first meeting, then you're able to have that discussion, talk about the permissive choices, raise any questions, and then to that point, if there's questions that come up that you're not sure how to answer, or there's a change that you want to make, that you're not sure you can, that's where you can then once again communicate with me, and you can use this form to see, you know, if my response is call your legal counsel, usually that means good luck.
But that way,
But yeah.
you're not holding up administration from being able to work on it, because you're waiting on
Yeah.
a meeting that has to happen in the evening, and not having the people available, where then when it's presented at the first read, we all get to discuss it.
Yeah.
And we all get to put the input in and understand what's going on with it.
I think that's good, and also is for us, since we're discussing it, I think it would be helpful when we do put it on the agenda that the PDQ is on the board docs with the form
Yes.
and the policy, so we have all the supporting, when we get it, so since we're discussing, I just wanted to put that out. Now that way it's a part of, so we don't have to go look for it, it's all right there on board docs when we do the first read and come to discuss, it'd be great to have those components already available to the
It
board.
would give us the idea of what all has been, what options have been made, if there was any options.
Yeah.
Is this what,
I was gonna say, if anyone missed the PDQ email, it's also another opportunity for them to actually read what came out from our policy provider and association to then coincide with where we are with that policy.
is that basically what you did in Hamilton?
Yeah, like last
Okay.
time. So we would get the quarterly stuff from them, and
Uh-huh.
then we would hand it out. You know, I get treasure stuff, especially I get their stuff, and then the superintendent would come over and answer,
Yeah.
her secretary,
Uh-huh.
get all the answers.
Yep.
And then if we had any questions, we talk to Kenna, and then we would let the board know, hey, here's the
Yep.
first read for this, here's all
Yep.
the stuff, what's going on, have a first read, any
Okay.
questions, second read. And sometimes though, we did have that had to be emergency,
Yeah.
that was very rare, but yeah.
Yes.
There's a-
And I thought I invented the wheel.
No.
No. Sorry, nice try.
But we're blessed to have you, Adam.
I know, I do think that's gonna really help, but like I said, Hamilton always did it, they're like on it for policy, so, I definitely, you know, lean on his expertise, but don't just make him voluntold to do policy, right? It's like I, at OSBA, somehow got stuck with being the one who always has to review fiscal policies, I don't know how I got stuck with that, but like nobody else wanted it, so,
There's a reason for that.
I know, but yes. So I mean, I think based on just what you've shared and how things worked on the past, I do think the approach to have administrators do that legwork and prep, and then do the two readings at a board meeting sounds like it would work most effectively for your district, especially as you're becoming familiar with the process, and help you, you know, be prepared for those conversations as well. And then as well as get that input if you need it, and get some of those initial questions answered. So that I think was, so as I think through this, it sounds like where we landed was when a PDQ comes out, as board members, you know, you all have access to it. You have the ability to sit in on those webinars if you want to, or listen to them recorded. And then working through who then is the administrator who's going to primarily look at those updates, work through it, get those drafts together, put it on a board agenda for a first read and discussion with the full board. And then if any changes need made or you have questions, get that input, you know, communicate with us if you have questions, get it to be what you want to actually adopt, put it on the agenda for adoption. And then there's a process whereby you notify OSBA, and then we work to update it on your manual, on your online active site. We lock that down for you because we want to make sure things are as pretty as possible. And align and make sure we retire old copies, keep links consistent and things like that. So that's a process that we provide under that. So thoughts on that process and steps for staying current. And you all look at it when you're supposed to, so that's good. You get a gold star there. Questions on that? Thoughts on that, or anything you want to hash through on that? Okay. And then, yeah.
It's
Sorry.
really important, there's no additional things in this topic before we move forward, or any other board member.
All right.
I didn't hear, sorry, I didn't hear that.
I was just repeating what Ms. Candace
Yeah.
stated. She was asking were there any questions, and I was just making sure everyone had an opportunity to provide input, so we can, everyone had an opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you.
And then the next thing is really making sure that, number 6, I like to put it on there on that essential questions about what the process is to ensure district level procedures and those handbooks align with board policies. Obviously, when a board policy changes, administrators are looking at it to determine which group of your school community it impacts. If that's students, I know that there's regular communications that go out in schools. It might be including it in there to say, hey, here's the most current policy in this area. Here's where it's available. As you look at updating handbooks, always look to make sure you're looking at the most current active policy on it, right? So annually when student handbooks are updated, make sure you're referencing current board policies, and then being prepared to update those or communicate those throughout the year. Yes.
I think that you said this, but I want to confirm, with the regulations, we get those notices automatically. That's not something we have to do on our own.
So that's the same process as the policies. Yes.
But anything that's required, we'll get those.
Through the same way you would the other updates
Okay.
through the PDQ. Yep.
Thank you.
Good question. I'm sorry. And I didn't show you, thank you. I didn't show you an example of what it looks like with. So this is an example. I mentioned hazing and bullying a couple times. This is where you have your JFCF hazing and bullying, and then your JFCF-R, your hazing and bullying procedure that goes along with it. Okay. I'm going to close out of yours so I don't accidentally forget I'm in yours and edit any of your drafts. So that's, like I said, the next step is making sure that things align, they're communicated, and then just continuing to review policy, right? So if you have a local need that comes up, or you're like, hey, do we cover this? Reach out, let me know. I can say, actually, you do cover it in this policy, or typically we see this addressed here, or have you thought about this? So reach out for those questions. And then, side note, we actually recommend you do the full review of your whole manual every 5 years. It's less painful than the first time, especially switching from one provider to another. So just keep that in mind for 5 years down the road. You can pick up the phone and say, hey, Kenna, we're ready to do policy again. So those were the main. I'm looking through my essential questions, our in-service. Let me look back to our PowerPoint to see if there was anything.
Just the one comment I would make, it kind of goes back to the earlier question on the changes. Our previous policy, we had policy and we had administrative guidelines, and that's not the way this is set up. So we tried to incorporate, when appropriate, some of those administrative guidelines into our policy. We went through those as well.
Yes, we did.
So I have a question.
Yes.
When we recently went through the policy that we were trying to get through, and I guess it didn't flow smoothly, that didn't come down, am I correct in saying that didn't come down quite like a normal policy revision come down with what you were describing as far as policy updates coming to us and the PDQs or whatever you call them, right?
I'm not sure which policy specifically you're referring to. I know we only released one in February. It was IGBEA-R. So that one would have been an OSBA recommendation.
I'm impressed.
It's sad. I literally, I'll see license plates and I'll be like, oh, that's the policy code for this. I knew it was bad, but one day my husband woke up and he's like, I'm dreaming policy codes. I was like, oh no. You suck.
I to seek help.
You know about the policy that we were reviewing that kind of didn't get through?
It was that policy.
So-
It was IGBEA-R.
That was the one, it was our first meeting. acknowledge, and we started out where there was some debate about the PDQ update, we're like, no, that's just like interesting thing for us, then we got to the policy, and we were debating wording and what did this mean and connecting to, it's kind of like, these have been vetted, this was a required policy changing, what do you need to do, and things like that, so no, it wasn't a normal setup like we talked about, but it was kind of our first foray into that.
So it was part of the.
It was part of the update.
It was part of the update that you were referencing, however, it was customized, it was changed by what?
No, so we had that policy, and then we had two other policies that have been written by legal for that meeting,
They were written
by our legal counsel for that meeting.
okay, so that was kind of outside, the part written by legal was kind of outside.
Correct. Yes. And so in that case, if you have something that you're working with legal counsel, our role, what we will do is help you figure out where it fits in your manual and give it the appropriate code. But that's one of those that we would say, you know, this is something you need to work with legal counsel on.
And so maybe to smooth it out, incorporate it more through you so that the updates go out, I don't know. Or is it just a one-off and it's just the way it is?
That was a policy that we had discussed prior to converting, but since we were trying to make sure the required documents, because we were sunsetting our provider, and we needed to get a new provider, we moved that policy to this year versus last year. And that policy was written through OSBA so they could tell us where it fit.
Yes.
And we just did not go over it because it wasn't a requirement. So our goal was to ensure we were in compliance by having the required policies. But that legwork had already been done prior to it. Apologize if I thought we discussed this, but if we didn't provide additional context, my apologies. But OSBA was in the loop, legal counsel was in the loop.
Yep.
It was an add-on from the previous board.
And that was GECEA, correct?
Am I right that it?
That is correct.
A policy that OSBA doesn't have?
That is
That's
correct.
why we went
It is,
to-
yes, it is a policy that we would defer you to your legal counsel.
Correct, and you did reach out to OSBA and was referred to legal counsel. Hence how the policy came about, sent back to OSBA for OSBA to provide the, where it fits
Code,
best
yes,
in
the
the code.
appropriate code.
And then they're forced to vote.
Other questions on that? I looked at the rest of my PowerPoint was just like, you know, tips and tricks and knowing your local process that we walked through. Other questions? You gonna test me on policy code? Side note, what's really sad is my 6-year-old was playing Barbies the other day and she was playing being a policy worker. So my whole household, it's you know, a sad world. So it's funny. I was like, wow, yeah. So
You do know that I'm a mandatory reporter to children's services.
for training her to be a policy worker, and they tell me they think my job would be boring. So, you know, my husband's a teacher, and he's like, what's our policy on this, Kenna? I'm like, yeah, here's what it is. Here's what it is. I trained you well. Other questions on anything? Anything we didn't cover that you would still like to cover this evening? I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you all and walk through this, so. Okay. And you have my contact information, so feel free to reach out when you have questions. I think that's all I have. Unless you need anything else. Stop sharing. Well, thank you. I look forward to continuing to work with you. Maybe I'll see some of you at BLI this weekend.
I will say it's been a long time. We're gonna miss you. We've been hanging out for
I know,
a very
right?
long time.
I'm still around, so, and I'm here if you need help, but, yes, just mostly email, phone, and then at conferences and workshops. So, do you need to put anything up, right? You're good, okay. All right, well, thank you. I'll get out of your way. I appreciate you all. Thanks for taking the time to do this, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, our next item is a master facility planning overview. We have Josh Karnovich from SHP.
Good evening. Give me 1 second to get set up, please. There we go. Sorry. It kicked over when I- Sorry about that. There we go. All right. Good evening. How's everyone? Thank you for having me this evening, and excited to be able to report out on the progress that we've made in regards to the master planning. So tonight, what I'd like to do is I have a number of slides. Some of them I'm going to stop and kind of get into the details on. Some I'm going to kind of move through kind of quickly. A lot of this is information that you've seen before, but it's important when we get to these sort of milestone steps that we have a document that sort of memorializes the process up to this point. So again, this is all information that will get loaded to the planning website, so it'll be available to the community. And so we want to make sure that all that information is there. So what I'd like to do is, if I can get my slide presentation to advance, there we go. So I'm going to spend time talking about the process and what we're doing tonight. And then I'm going to go through the process that we went, that we used with the Facilities Master Planning Committee, and starting with them on foundational information and then taking them through a series of exercises. And then that team ultimately put together a master plan recommendation that I'm going to share with you tonight. And then I'm going to also talk to you a little bit about some follow-up that's taken place since that last meeting, some things that we're continuing to investigate. And then we'll talk about next steps. I know we've talked at length about this concept of these sort of three pillars of what we consider good master planning, of being educationally fantastic, financially responsible, community developed, and supported. What I'm here to tell you tonight is I feel like we're doing really well with two of the three. The third one is one that we need to continue to work on. I feel like we have had good input from our educators, and I feel like we're moving towards a plan that we think is going to serve your district for the next 40 to 50 years. I do feel like we're working towards working on a plan that's financially responsible and how we can layer that plan for your future. The piece that I feel like we still need to continue to work on is the community developed and supported, and finding ways to reach out to the community, get them involved in this process. And I know for those of you that have had a chance to attend or see our meetings, ultimately we are still looking for ways to bring community support in, bring community into this process, and continue to help the community understand what this master plan is and why we're going through this process at this point. And so I know you guys have seen this calendar multiple times. For the most part, the calendar has stayed the same throughout the entire process from January to today. We've made a few adjustments as we've understood exactly when we were going to finalize the recommendation, and then exactly when the commission needs the master plan, the actual approval of the project agreement, which is coming in late May or early June. But tonight, where we are in this process is you see the red, which is the co-funded plan to the board. That's where we are tonight. I'm bringing the plan to you tonight for your consideration. And tonight, what we're really asking you to do is to authorize the superintendent to move forward in working on the plan with the commission. So I think it's important that we understand that what we're focused on tonight is the plan itself. Things are still going to move. We're still going to see movement in the dollars. We're still going to see some clarification and some questions we have on the enrollment and how career tech is being counted at the high school and what that impact is. But ultimately, the plan is what we're really focused on tonight, and authorizing the superintendent to move forward and continuing to develop the plan with the state. And so what that will lead to is your opportunity to see in late May, early June, you're going to see a final agreement from the state, which is going to detail out all the information, all the dollar amounts down to the penny. We're going to have detailed information about all of the student counts and the square footages, and all of that information will be in minute detail for you to be able to review before you approve that project agreement with OFCC. And again, that should be in the late May, early June timeframe when we'll be coming back with that plan. So I think it's important to understand that as we move forward with this, that's the next step. And as we're looking at the calendar, the other thing for consideration that I've got in our next steps is, again, further conversation about when you as a district would move forward with securing your local share. So if you choose to move forward with a bond issue or a combination income tax plus bond issue, whatever that ultimately looks like, whatever the recommendation is from the finance team, your first opportunity to do that obviously would be November of this year, and your second opportunity would be in May of next year. You can see on here those dotted yellow filing dates. Those are the dates where the treasurer has to have information to the county auditor in order to be able to make it onto the ballot. So we have to have all of our dollars and all of our local funded initiatives established and know exactly what those are as early as we can in July, which will then allow him the opportunity to work with the county auditor. So that's another piece of a next step that we're going to have to focus on. So again, if there's any questions about the calendar, otherwise I'm going to continue to keep moving. Okay. Just a reminder of the meetings that we conducted. So we conducted our first facility master planning meetings first in January and then in February. In between that, we had a community survey that we put out. You can see in the months of February and March, we went out to each of the elementary schools. And again, I've been upfront with everybody that was in part an outreach to try and see if we could get some community involvement, to get some members of the communities at each of the elementaries to see if they might come out if we did something a little bit more local. It was also selfishly a way for me to get back into the buildings and put my eyes on all the spaces and see the conditions of the facilities. So we did that, and I would say that we had sort of moderate success in that. We had some community members come out to a few of those meetings. I think one meeting we might have had as many as 10 or 12, but most of the meetings it was probably a handful of folks. So again, an attempt to try and involve the community. And then our real focused master plan committee meetings, number 3 and number 4, were in March, and then just this past second week of April. And then obviously here we are tonight on May 1st. So in each one of these meetings, what we tried to share was the foundational information so that everybody was working off of the same plate. So as we talked about your relationship with the commission, a couple of things that I tried to stress with everyone so that they understood is that you've had a long, outstanding relationship with the state, with the Ohio Facility Construction Commission, that ultimately you've been working with them since 2014, that they helped you obviously co-fund your high school. At that point in time, that was what was considered segment 1. And that segment locked you in at a 53% state share and a 47% local share. And so that is your state and local shares of your co-funded budget that moves forward in all of your project agreements. And that the only piece that's sort of outside of that is considering local funded initiatives, which we've described, I think, with this group about the fact that those are anything that you may have to pay 100% for. So for instance, if we decided that we're going to build a new middle school and it's going to have its own auditorium, and auditorium is a space that's not typically co-funded with the OFCC. So there are a number of nuances like that as we work through the plans that we have to consider, and we're still working on that list and trying to finalize that list. And so the details on the segments, so in 2014, segment 1 obviously was building the new high school. And at that point in time, the high school's capacity was at 1440. And that was to house grades 9 and 12. And that was also an allowance to abate and demolish the existing high school, obviously, which you took advantage of. Segment 2 was projected again to be the solution for all the other students, obviously for PK8. And then understanding that the enrollment projections are telling us that we need an addition at the high school, and that's one of the details that we're still trying to work out the nuances of. What we've come to understand is that the state doesn't have enough state share to be able to fund all of segment 2 as far as their budget is concerned. And so more than likely, we're talking about a segment 2, which will have a discrete portion, and then you're going to do a future segment, and that time frame is to be determined. It could be a situation where the state comes back to you as early as next year and says, hey, we've got the rest of our money to finish out your final segment. And then you as a district are going to have to make a decision if you want to proceed forward with that next segment or how you would like to proceed. So that's something that ultimately is going to unfortunately have to be pushed to a future decision. And then the last thing that we talked about was the 2/3 rule. And so ultimately the cost to renovate versus the cost to replace for facilities, when that cost exceeds 66%, the commission is going to recommend to you that you consider replacing as opposed to renovating. And so those calculations were run for all of your elementary and middle schools. And you can see the results of those calculations here. You can see that Sedalia was the only building that was even close to the 66%. All the other buildings were significantly above the 2/3. And so ultimately what this leads to is the need that if you want to keep one of these facilities and continue to use it for K-12 education, is to go through a waiver process and more than likely also have to come up with additional local funds in order to support that building if it should go over its budget. And those local funds are considered local funded initiatives, so they would be at 100% local share. So again, this is all foundational information that we've been sharing at all of our meetings. And so, as we talked about the potential of moving forward with master planning options, we've always talked about the fact that there's sort of three ways to skin the cat, if you will. One is looking at all the facilities and saying, you know what, we're going to renovate and add on to the buildings and keep all of our existing facilities plus that addition at the high school. Option number two would be constructing all new and adding on to the high school. And then option three would be some combination of the two. And we investigated each one of these options in a number of different master plan scenarios with your facilities team. Other piece of foundational information, obviously, is looking at the enrollment and the 10-year projection for the enrollment. I will tell you that there is still some open questions here that we're trying to resolve that have come to light in the last couple of days. We feel confident about the enrollment, obviously PK through 8th grade. I feel like that enrollment, we don't see any changes coming in that enrollment projection. Where the questions are at is about how career tech has been calculated. We believe that there may be a flip-flop of your career tech students and understanding exactly who is staying in the building and who is leaving the building on a regular basis. And we feel like those numbers may potentially be inverted. And so that they're causing right now the high school addition to look larger than it even needs to be to support the student population. This is something that it could have come at any point in time as the enrollment projections were being created. It could have been some confusion in how the questionnaire was handled, because there's a questionnaire that goes out to the district that starts the enrollment process, basically. It may have been something that happened with Future Think. We're just not sure yet, so we're trying to investigate that and ultimately trying to confirm it. And so,
I'm sorry.
Please, no,
It
please.
looks like this could be the inverse of
Yeah.
what they screwed up last time.
I think it's possible. That's what we really want to confirm. So before we finalize the numbers or before we finalize the size of the high school addition, we're going to double check and triple check those numbers to make sure that they're correct. We feel pretty confident. So if I go to the next slide, we tried to isolate, isolate the student groups. And as you can see, the 10-year projection doesn't show a lot of movement in PK5 or 6-8, right? We're seeing a smaller movement there, but it shows a pretty significant increase in the 9-12 students plus the career tech. Now, the main thing that I've been focused on and been trying to communicate to everybody is these are showing 10-year enrollment projections. So they're telling you that today you have this many students, and in 10 years we're saying that you're going to increase by this number of students. What this doesn't include is bringing all your kids that are in modulars back into facilities.
You say it does not?
It does not. So the students are counted for, but in any master plan that we consider, so for instance, let's take a look at any of the buildings that have modulars. If there's 8 classrooms of modulars sitting outside, that's 200 students that are outside the building that have to come into the building, because the commission's not going to recognize a master plan that has a modular solution as part of that facility.
Okay.
So when we look at how that impacts that elementary, not only do we have to think about that elementary plus the 10 years of increase of student population, we also have to bring all those kids inside. And so when we look at the additions for any of your elementary school buildings, it's got to include all the kids that are in modulars as well. And that'll show up in the master plan examples that I showed. So it's a sort of twofold piece, right? It's not just we're looking at this and saying, well, we're only looking at 72 students over the next 10 years in grades PK5. We also have to bring all the modular kids back in too, right? And that's what's causing the sizes of the additions and some of the master plan costs to be as much as they are. Okay. So again, my message tonight, we're going to continue to look at the career tech numbers. We're going to double and triple check those numbers before we finalize the addition at the high school and finalize the addition size and the student population for that. Please.
Is this future thing, are they part of what we hired to do, or is this what the state?
Yeah, this is Future Think is contracted with OFCC, so they're the
Okay,
same.
that's what, okay,
Yep.
that's what I thought.
Yeah,
Okay.
they are the same
Because
enrollment.
we used Crawford.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
And as a reminder, Cropper did look at your numbers, and they felt like the projections that are shown are consistent with what they felt like your enrollment was doing over the next 10 years. What I would say is that I'm not sure that we got into the weeds with them on the career tech portion to understand who's in and who's out of the building.
Okay.
And so that's where we're going to go, right? We're going to start by double checking that with what information you have today, and then working that back with Future Think, working that back with Cropper, and then readjusting the master plan when we finalize the square footages and the numbers.
Could you restate, because I'm hearing copper, Cropper as in cropping and tree or.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who we hired to do our projections, and Future Think is being hired by the state.
That's correct.
Oh, okay, all right. And what was your initial statement about us in the state? That was all about just comparing?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understood it correctly, that Future Think was, these numbers that are being presented to us right here are the state's projection numbers, not
That's
the projection numbers that we received from Crawford.
Okay. And how does that work? How does that comparison work?
Yeah, so-
We use Cropper, but how do they weigh in if it's?
Yeah, so what ultimately, when we got the enrollment projections from Future Think from OFCC, those were forwarded to Cropper, and we asked them the question about whether or not they lined up with where they felt like you should be in the next 10 years. And they felt like you were within 1% of where they felt like your enrollment projection was going to be. So when they looked at it, they felt like these were consistent.
Including the high school?
That's correct. But we're still, the question and where I was headed with that is, I'm not sure that we got into the weeds with Cropper to confirm exactly how many career tech students were in the building on a daily basis and how many were leaving to go to Eastland Fairfield. Yeah. So I think they would look at the numbers and say the numbers are consistent with what we projected, but are we correctly showing who's leaving and who's staying? That's really what we have to drill down on. Because ultimately, if that number flips and there's 350 students that are headed to Eastland Fairfield, that's 350 students we don't have to house in an addition or in additional career tech space at the high school. That's what we're trying to nail down. It has probably somewhere between a $5 and $6 million impact on the master plan. That's what we're trying to get to. Any other questions about the enrollment before I move on? Okay.
Is there another, I mean, is census data, is there any other data that you would look to make sure it's as accurate as possible?
And I would say we've got two of the best enrollment projection specialists in the state working on their project.
We, being your company?
No, between the state, OFCC, and between Cropper,
Okay.
we have two of the best groups in the state.
Okay, thank you.
There's only about one more group, and ultimately they all came out of the same organization when they first started, and then they broke off and all look at it a little bit different. But to have two enrollment projection specialists say we think we're within about a percentage point, I think we feel pretty confident that they've got the number right. It's just a question of making sure we've got it accounted correctly.
So regarding the funds in segment 2, okay, so is there not a fear that segment 2 takes 3 or 4 or 5 years and the budget we establish here is worthless because construction costs have multiplied, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and they will. And to your point, they will. What we're focused on today is, we have to take a snapshot of today and make a decision from a planning standpoint on what that snapshot tells us. And then as you look at that snapshot and say, well, we're going to tackle one side or the other, we're either going to tackle, our elementary school students or our middle school students, and probably the high school at the addition in either one of those. We do a snapshot of that, and then we say, all right, this is our next segment. And this portion, this future segment is going to hold off, and then we're going to reevaluate everything when you come back to that future segment. So for instance, they're going to rerun your enrollment projection whenever that is. So even if it's 2 years from now, they're going to rerun your enrollment. They're going to reevaluate your budgets, so they would update your budgets to whatever the most recent cost set is. So all of that is going to occur whenever that future segment happens.
My concern would be that, and you'll have to help me to understand how this plays out. My concern is we show the master plan, and it's got enrollment numbers on it, and it's got budget numbers on it for the entire project.
Yes.
Including all of segment 2.
That's correct.
If we're not doing it right now, and we don't know when it will get funded, is it more logical, possible to only show segment 1 and not show maybe projected enrollment or definitely finance numbers?
Sure.
Costs on the segment that we don't know when it will be financed?
Yeah, so one thing I want to be clear about, let's make sure our language is the same. The next segment that we're going to do is segment 2, right? So you already performed segment 1 for the high school. This is segment 2, whatever that solution is. And then what I'm calling the next one would be the future segment, right? Just to be clear. I appreciate exactly what you're saying. The issue is with the state, you have to create a full master plan with them. And you did this at your high school as well. You did a segment for your high school, and then you created a full master plan for the entire district at that time. And then all the rest of that master plan has been reevaluated, and that's what we're presenting tonight. And that'll happen again, and it'll happen if you end up doing 2 more segments. Let's say you break the next segment into 2 components. It'll happen again and again. And I mean, I think to the state's credit, what they're trying to do is they want a total picture of what your solution is for your district at this point in time, so that they have something to memorialize it. And then ultimately, they're going to reevaluate it when they get to you. And that reevaluation, it does 2 things. The costs go up, but the amount of money that they're going to give you goes up proportionally, right? So if we continue, let's say the next 5 years, we go up 5% a year, the state share is going up 5% a year as well, right? Okay. So they're going to continue to fund the project at 57%, whatever that master plan, that future segment is. So I think it's more of a memorialization, if you will. And so we try to evaluate that with the full master plan, and then proceed forward and understand that it will be reevaluated. Okay.
Josh, did the state give us a deadline for that? You know what that information, is there a deadline for that?
I'm sorry, the next segment or this current segment? Yes, right away. Yeah, right away. So tonight, effectively, what the resolution is that you would be passing is to allow Jamie to proceed forward in working with the state on this next segment and finalizing what's called the notice of conditional approval. And so I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. Okay. All right. Some other foundational information. So we, again, understanding that with Groveport Madison, we can't solve the solution of what the next segment is until we also solve where sites are available, right? Where we can build in this next segment, what sites are presently available, what sites would need to become available. And so we did have a little, what I would call a flood zone primer. And we talked about the sort of 3 layers of flood zone that affect a number of your sites. And so this information, I'm not going to go heavily into the weeds on this, but just understand that there's sort of 3 areas that we're going to come across in each one of your sites, and each one has a little bit of a different restriction. Zone X is the sort of pink area that you'll see if you look on the Franklin County Auditor's GIS. That area is an area where you can build, and it's got limited restrictions. So we ultimately can build in the Zone X, which is the pink if you look on the right-hand side. The 100-year floodplain, which is the blue area, that area, you can build in that area. It just comes with a number of restrictions. And so we have to be very careful about that because it will add time and cost to the project. And so one of the time restrictions is that anytime we get into the floodplain, we typically have to go through a review with the Army Corps of Engineers. And that can add 6 months of approval to the process. But we have some strategies that we're going to investigate to see if we can't offset that at least at one location. And then the last area is this area where we've got the pink and blue hatch, and that's a floodway area, and that's effectively what we would call a no-build zone. We really need to stay out of the floodway because the restrictions on that area are just too cumbersome to even consider. And so I included just a couple of quick examples so that you could sort of see the impact. And so Madison Elementary School, for those of you that know the site, the building drops off, the site drops off right just north of the building. It's got a pretty significant 15 foot drop. And you see that it immediately goes from Zone X straight into the blue area, which is the 100-year floodplain, straight into the floodway, which is the back half of the site. So this makes this site very challenging, right? From the opportunity of thinking about trying to build here, we'd have to raise the floodplain up 15 feet, and that just from a cost standpoint is just too restrictive. Please.
Is that LFI money?
So what would happen is that if we were looking at bringing in such a significant import, you would have your site budget that would be co-funded, and then we would blow through that site budget to bring those soils in. So eventually what they would say is, we're co-funding you up to this point. Anything over and above that, you need to be carrying some LFI dollars to try and cover. And so it's not that the whole thing would be LFI, it's just that you are going to exceed what is the co-funded budget. And that ultimately would be a challenge where we would be looking for dollars within the project, and they're just, you don't want to be taken from the building in order to build the site.
So on this drawing, is the building itself on X or is it elevated above X?
It's elevated above X at Madison Elementary. It's outside the flood. It's outside of all the flood zones, according to the most current auditor's map. And one thing I want to be very clear about is the floodway and the flood zones change, right? And so when you're looking on the auditor's website, and this is a good example, you'll notice that this whole neighborhood that's just east of Madison, you can see is all within effectively what is Zone X, which is the 10-year flood. That area, that may not have been in floodway when it was built, right? Because floodways change, right? Water elevations change, flood zones change. And so we're using the most current information, but all of that, my understanding is that it gets reevaluated on a kind of regular basis, depending on development that's happening in the area and how these things sort of change. And so it's possible for flood zones to change. So when you look at some of these neighborhoods, it may be that they were originally built outside the flood zone and they've now become part of the flood zone.
So who is the adjacent 3035? 3035, is that us or is that somebody else? Adjacent lot?
It's my understanding that's not owned by the district.
Say again?
That it's not owned by the district is my understanding. And you can see that only a portion, so a significant portion of that is in the floodway, and then there's a smaller portion that's in the floodplain, right? So when you look at Sedalia and North, you can see that, again, dealing with similar issues. Here we've got the 100-year floodplain that effectively surrounds both of the buildings. So both of the buildings were elevated up. And obviously were brought to an elevation that kept them out of the floodplain. And this is one of the sites that we're considering for potential new facilities because we believe that we have a strategy in place where we might be able to sort of trade. So if you effectively think about it, you've got so much land that's sitting in the floodplain, so much of it sitting out. If you ultimately trade that land and build up and then drop the area potentially where one of the buildings is currently sitting, and you're doing a 1-for-1, and we're doing a trade of the amount of floodplain that was on the site. And so if we're able to do that, we believe that there's a strategy that would see us being able to build on some of this land that you already have. So that's why I bring that up as an example, because you're going to see that later. Any other questions on floodplain, floodways?
So is that, when you're talking about borrow pits, moving elevation, that kind of thing, is that covered by the program, or is that automatic?
We're going to evaluate that. I think it ultimately comes down to how many feet that we're dealing with. If it's a few feet, I could see where an OFCC co-funded budget could cover that amount. If it's multiple feet, then I feel like there's a chance that we may need to protect ourselves with some local funded initiative dollars, that if we ultimately don't use it, we can use it someplace else in the project. So it's definitely something we're going to consider. We're going to talk a bit more about this when we get into the sites, but I did want to just for a second talk about the current district configuration. And so we've been using this graphic to talk about different master plan options. And so effectively, I know I've shared this graphic with you before, but you've got grades across the top. You have your elementaries, your preschool, your elementaries, middle school, and high school, reading from left to right. What you're seeing in the numbers were the last round of numbers that Cropper ran for you. And so this shows the total number of students. So if I look at Asbury, we have 506 total students that were in that building, and I think those numbers are from 2020, late 2022, early 2023 was the last enrollment that they were using for their calculations. And then you looked at the capacity, which was including the modulars. And so why this is important is, again, we were trying to stay consistent with understanding that, for instance, again, using Asbury as a comp, look at that building, it's got 4 modular classrooms, which, if it's 25-1 in the modular classrooms, that's 100 students that we somehow have to get back in to the building, either in an addition or in the renovation of Asbury as we look at it. And obviously it becomes a big impact when you look at a building like Sedalia, where you've got 12 modular classrooms. And it requires a pretty significant addition to be able to support those students coming back into non-modular classrooms. Okay, so you're going to see this diagram again and again. So we'll go through the different options. But so when we got into our third facility master planning committee meeting, we ran that group through a series of exercises. And what I will tell you is, I think for that meeting, we had roughly maybe 45 to 50 folks in the room, probably a very small number of community members. So it was more heavily educators, principals, administrators, teachers, some teachers that are parents that have students in the district. And so it was a group where we were probably more focused on educational strategies, right? We were trying to work with that team and get the most out of that team that we could in order to make sure that we were making good, strong educational decisions, right? So we talked a lot about configurations. We talked a lot about the existing buildings and their relationship to their neighborhoods. And so one of the first exercises we did, asked everybody to talk about the existing district configuration, so that graphic that I just showed you, and then really asked everybody to get up and put some Post-it notes up and get some conversation started about what's working well in our existing facilities and what's not working well. And in having gone through the elementaries and meeting each of the parents, each of the principals, I had a pretty good sense from the group of some of the things that I was going to hear. We talked a lot about site circulation and how busing works at each of our facilities. We talked at length about facilities that have a number of walkers and facilities that don't have much in the way of walkers from their adjacent neighborhoods. Talked a lot about how the neighborhoods use the sites, right? Not only during the day, but also in after hours, folks using the ball diamonds and using the playground. We talked a lot about the buildings and the fact that we've added secure entry vestibules, but there's still a number of areas where we're probably not as looking for other opportunities, I would say, to make those facilities even more secure. So there were a number of different things that were brought up. We talked a lot about the buildings that still have some areas of open classroom concept and the struggle with noise, and the fact that even some of the temporary walls that had been built through the years, that they're still a challenge. And classes moving through other classrooms to get to the corridor. Just a number of things that were discussed. We did talk at length about the modulars and the relationship of the modulars to the buildings. And so I got some really good conversations started there. And what that did is that led us to the second exercise, which was taking a look at a number of different master plans. And so we brought, I think, on the order of maybe 12 or 15 different master plans, just different examples of configurations to challenge the team. And so where we started was just asking them, just gut level, give us your reaction to these master plans and kind of talk to us a bit about what you see as the positives and the negatives. And we spent probably 15 or 20 minutes voting, and then spent another probably half hour talking about the voting. And so you can see your team working on these and talking about these different configurations. We put them all across the back wall, so everybody had the opportunity to see all of them at one time. You can see we also included the site plans for each of the buildings, and so we could talk about the different impacts of the sites and where facilities and additions could potentially be located. And so I felt like it was a really good session. And out of that session, we ultimately came away with some, effectively some opinions on how to proceed forward and thinking about sort of the most successful master plan options. And so as you take a look at this, what I've done graphically is if you remember the existing facilities conditions, all of those facilities were in blue, right? And so as you look at this, Little Cruisers campus is still in blue, the high school is still in blue. What that indicates is that those are facilities that we're not renovating, right? We're not going to be touching those facilities and renovations. Little Cruisers campus is outside right now of the OFCC master plan, except in the fact, obviously, that we understand the preschool numbers there. But then as you look at the high school being a practically new building, we're not renovating the high school. We'd be looking at just putting the addition onto the building. And ultimately dealing with whatever impacts of where we touch the existing facility. And so these master plan options and options A's, we're all looking at some combination of renovation and addition in different configurations for elementary and middle school. So if you take a look at A1, this was considering renovating all of your 6 elementaries and then putting additions onto each one of the buildings to bring not only that impact of that 10-year enrollment projection, but also bring all the students that are in modulars into new addition space. So this would be renovating these facilities into a like new condition and then putting a new addition onto each one of the facilities. And then likewise, if you look at the middle schools, it was renovations at North and South, and then renovating Central, and Central needed a small addition in order to take on the little bit of impact of the next 10 years of enrollment. So A1, again, fully focused on working with our existing facilities, renovating to a like new condition and putting additions on. And then if you look at A2, A3, and A4, they're all different configurations of thinking about the impact of what happens at the middle schools. And so if you look at A2, that was, again, same configuration, K5, but then 6, 7, 8 would be 2 new middle schools to support the 6, 8 population. And then the high school stays the same with its addition. If you look at A3 looked at keeping South and North, and then ultimately converting Central back to a freshman building, effectively. So looking at it as a freshman building, just taking on the 9th grade, and it would need a little addition in order to be able to do that. And ultimately, if we take Central offline to be a freshman building, then we need to replace Central to take on the rest of the 6, 7, 8 population. And so A3 was looking at that with a new Central middle school. And then A4 was looking at that, instead of building a new building, is putting additions on the North and South in order to take on that population.
There was one with option what had the freshman academy?
Both options A3 and A4 were looking at having a 9th grade academy. And when you take a look at the voting, two things I'd like to mention. One is at the top right-hand corner, you can see that we put a co-funded cost to this, and you can see the costs were totaled up across the bottom. And what we found in looking at the master plans is that because the cost to renovate versus the cost to replace is getting up in the 80s and the 90th percentile, and the fact that we've got to put additions onto these facilities, the cost to renovate versus cost to replace options, when we're looking at renovations and additions, those numbers are as much, if not more, than the cost of building new, right? And so when you look at those two different options or those two different considerations.
Option 3. So if you're like, let me play that with that.
Mhm.
You can't build me a building that will be as good as our old high school or your common middle school central. You won't build us a building with 12-foot masonry, and that kind of architecture. And I believe that building with its oak and the way it's made will probably be better in another 50 years than what you would build us today. So option 3, why wouldn't we at all? Why would we need to renovate our old high school that can probably house 650 kids? Why would you renovate it at all and not just use it?
Well, if you're working with OFCC, then you're ultimately working with them to bring that building to a like new condition.
We're bringing it
To a like new condition. So in order for them to co-fund anything at that facility, you ultimately would need to work with them to bring that building to a like new condition, which would be, obviously, new HVAC.
when you say work
electrical.
with them of anything, so let's just say that we just treat it as an as-is historic building that we do not want to do anything with, right?
Mhm.
We're just simply moving population. How does that factor in?
Then they wouldn't co-fund any cost at that building, effectively.
Right, because it wouldn't be any.
Exactly. Right. So that facility would stay as is, so there would be no renovation dollars put to
So
that
option
facility.
3 is stay as is. There is a third option, right?
There is, definitely. Yeah, for any of your facilities, you obviously could choose to not work with the commission on those facilities at all.
Right.
And so
you can still use
you're-
the other elements of this. and
Sure.
just say, okay, we're
Yeah.
gonna-
So, and the only thing that I would say to that is, the only thing that you're missing out on, obviously, is getting the state to help you with 57% of any improvement. Right, that's the challenge. Is to say, I've looked at the assessments obviously for all the buildings. I don't have them at my fingertips, but there's obviously some significant work that needs to be done at Central, long term, right? So as we look into the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to run into all the things that you run into in a facility of any age, right? We're going to need to replace a roof. We're going to need to replace a boiler. We're going to need to, upgrade finishes and upgrade furniture. And the challenge is if we don't work with the state, then we're doing that out of general fund at 100%.
But if we work with the state, then the taxpayer burden is what on that building?
I'll have to look back at the assessment. I apologize. I'd have to look at that.
47%.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it would be
No, I just meant as far as.
the actual dollar amount.
That equals 20 million.
Oh, gotcha.
Because that'll buy a lot of roofs and a lot of HVAC and all that,
Yeah. Please.
You've said 57% state share, quasi, it's state share 53.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
Apologize.
The other part is going back to when we started, we know that the state could not fund the full master plan even if we wanted to. But we're also obligated to develop a full master plan which addresses all of our student needs. And middle school central, current capacity is 500. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, I'll jump back real quick. Middle central capacity is 463.
Well, and then this is where, here's my analogy. You've come up with a model and you decided that it can't be a 4-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms unless it's 4,000 square foot. So maybe I own a 2,500 square foot, 4-bedroom, 2-bath. It is still a 4-bedroom, 2-bath. So just because the numbers say 400 and something doesn't mean anything. It's our old high school. It houses 600-700 kids. So there's also a classroom count. So honestly, those numbers are junk. I mean, you count the classrooms and you know the capacity of that school, and that's not it. I mean, that school housed, my entire class, and that was nothing in there. But before that, it held 4 grades. And it's not 400. We didn't have class. We didn't go from classes of 100 to classes of 500 like that. I mean, they were in there. So like my older siblings were in high school in that building. Those were big classes. So 400 is not a real number. It's just like the analogy. You're telling me my house is 2 bedroom based on the square footage model.
So I guess the only thing I would say is that, again, in trying to take advantage of the offer that you're receiving from OFCC, right? Their mission is equity across the state, right? And so when they're offering District X and District Y, they're offering the same funding based on the same model.
Right.
Right. And so that model starts with, understanding that new construction would be a 900 square foot classroom, and it would be a 25 to 1, right? 25 students to 1 teacher classroom configuration. That's the beginning of their model, right? And so ultimately that is layered over top of everything that they look at, right? And so to your point, that is their starting point.
Right.
And so when they're,
Industrial classrooms may be bigger.
yeah, exactly. And there's science classrooms are larger, industrial arts rooms are larger, music rooms, art rooms, right, correct. And actually, we'll talk a little bit about that in looking at some other
So
configuration.
I have a couple questions. I know it's being stated that the numbers are wrong, so he's saying the numbers are wrong, or are you saying the numbers are wrong? I'm confused now at this point as far as capacities and totals. I just want,
what you're saying.
I was stating, what Mr. Kirshner stated, that the numbers were wrong. So I was asking, are the numbers wrong, or are they right? Because that's not clear to me. What was presented is this way, but he's saying they're wrong. So where are we at with that?
No,
For starting point.
yeah, what I would say is we're having a conversation. It's not about from my perspective. And John, please, if I'm misconstrued. What John's indicating is that the commission has a lens that they look at your capacities of your facilities.
Okay, and so your numbers are based off of the OCC.
That's correct.
He's saying that. That's
Yeah, that's correct.
So in order for us to be in compliance with what is being offered,
Exactly.
these are what these numbers are. Therefore, they're not fluff, they're in compliance with OFCC, and that is why you're here today.
That's correct. So
Okay,
when
I
they,
just wanted to make sure I was talking.
But what I'm saying is,
I heard you.
but it used to be a 10 by 12 bedroom, now they're saying it has to be a 12 by 15, therefore they're taking away bedrooms. In this case, there's X number of classrooms that still function as classrooms. They may be, 120 foot classrooms instead of 180. However, there are still X number of classrooms that still accommodate X number of students. So the model is deceiving when you actually put bodies in the building. So it's not the capacity is 415. It's the capacity would be 415 if we couldn't function in the old classroom size. But clearly we do. So
the other thing that I would say is that, and this is a much longer theoretical conversation or philosophical conversation. The way that we educated students when that building was built and the way that we educate students now completely different.
That's what I was looking into. I understand that, the change in configuration, but at the end of the day, I'm sorry, at the end of the day, we need to have buildings that are comparable, so we can do the educational things we need to do. And that's also been a challenge, if I'm not mistaken, with maintenance, when trying to bring in some of the newer technology and things like that, because our buildings are older. Hence why OCC may have that model, so we can keep up with the times of where we are in education.
And I would just counter with, let's look at the historic buildings in Bexley and Upper Arlington and other districts that are top performing that were built in the 1930s, 1800s, whatever. So while square footage models are somewhat important, they're clearly not an end all for education.
In order for OFCC to be equitable, I think you have to accept their, when you accept their offer of funding,
Right.
you're accepting the way that the lens that they use in order to evaluate.
Right, but if we're saying, and let's say we're saying that here's two historic buildings that are important to people. I think it would only be fair to them to go in and say, here's the real capacity of the school, the way it's being used. Not here's the capacity of the school based on a square foot line. But yes, we know we have smaller classrooms, we know we have some different things, but the actual physical capacity of the way the building is built, because that's what happened with our old high school. It was built for 1675 or something like that, and then we come in with a new model, we tell everybody it was built for 1200, right? So I think it's good to be fair and honest with people, especially if we say, hey, this is something we want to keep. We want to keep these buildings, not to, because we as a voter, having attended there, I'm going to be offended when you tell me that our old high school has a capacity for 400 kids.
Yeah, I disagree with what you said about the old high school. In fact, you took us and filed a complaint against us on that, and you were proven wrong. So
No, it never was.
Oh, yes, it was.
No, the first time you guys showed up with Bricker and Eckler and you folded and said, whatever, Mr. Kirschner.
No.
Then there was a law passed that said,
No.
oh, you're allowed to lie in campaigning, so you got off. That's
No.
what happened.
No.
I've
you're
been to the
stuck
election
right now.
commission twice.
You're
And
stuck
the first
right
time it was illegal to lie and you had to withdraw your ads. It's historic.
now. You know,
Can Ms. Gray speak? We've heard your point, Mr. Kirschner. It would be great if we could hear Ms. Gray. Thank you. Continue, Ms. Gray.
yes,
What did you
the-
say? It said virtual appointments.
I said we heard you, Mr. Kirschner. It'd be fair to hear our other board members this evening, if that's okay. Did you hear me now? Was that clear?
Yes, and by the way, while we're on the subject of honesty, integrity, and accuracy, there is no foundation, there are no footers at the high school.
Okay,
Well,
well,
this
can
is
Ms.
revisionist history as long as we're having the conversation.
Mr. Kirschner, I'm gonna ask again if Ms. Gray can speak, and if you could give her her opportunity. Thank you.
I just wanted to just hear what he had said about the capacity of the old high school and what it was for.
Do you dispute it was a high school? You dispute that that's an old high school, the freshman building?
No, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about the high school that was demolished.
Oh, I definitely wasn't proven wrong on that. You guys, what you did was you counted pictures in the yearbook and used that for enrollment numbers, and that was admitted before the elections commission, and they found probable cause.
No, thank you.
With all due respect, I think we're getting off topic. Can we go back to the presentation?
Yes, please, thank you.
Can I ask a quick question, Josh?
Sure, please.
So when you have like option A4 and option A3, you have a freshman academy there. And but you still have an addition to the high school. If we had a freshman out of that school, why would we need an addition?
Yeah, if you take a look graphically, we're trying to illustrate that it's not as big an addition, right? So there's still an overage at the high school based on those numbers. And so instead of needing, a 100,000 square foot addition, we may only need a 15,000 square foot addition. There's still a delta there that we need to take on.
Is that overage because of the career tech, the possible career tech?
It may be there. It also may just be the 10-year enrollment projection of grades 10, 11, and 12, right? Because if we're going to the freshman building, we're just focused on ninth graders, and we know that there's a enrollment impact for the ninth graders for the next 10 years, and then there's still an impact for grades 10, 11, 12.
But it's just like, I don't think the numbers that adds up with the numbers on the 2024 draft enrollment projection. And also, the career tech, is there a reason there's no option for that going into the building across the AP building across the street?
Yeah, we purposely excluded 4,500 out of the calculations to take a look and see what the impact would be just at the high school for the time being. I think there is an option there that you could consider for the future, but we're trying to localize it to the high school to understand that impact first.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I can,
Yes.
so the A options that you see here, obviously we had the facilities master planning committee team vote on these options, and you'll notice that these options scored poorly, all right? And so as you look at A1 through A4, you notice that again, we had roughly, I think around 40 people voting, and the folks voted these options poorly because you can see there wasn't a lot of support of green dots, if you will, in this red dot, green dot exercise. And so then as we move forward, we had additional master plan options that we looked at. And so these master plan options, the B options, started with looking at new K5s. And so each one of these options looks at some configuration of new K5s and then has different configurations of what happens grades 6 through 9. So in option B1, we have new K5 elementaries, and those are 5 new K5s. And again, that's coming from the commission looking at the sort of sizing of the buildings and the sizes that they would like to see your enrollments at effectively for each one of those facilities. And so we centered those around 622 students equal capacity against all those elementaries. And then looked at multiple options of middle schools. So in B1, we looked at two new middle schools at 800 students, and then again, still requiring that addition at the high school. And then you look at B2, again, 5 K5s, and then keeping your existing middle schools, your 6-8 middle schools, renovating those to a like new condition and putting that small addition that's necessary that was shown going on to Central. And then again, the addition at the high school. And then looking at B3, 5 K5s, all same size. And then looking at that freshman academy option, which would be in 9th grade at Central, and then replacing Central with a new building. And then in B4, again, similar to what we looked at in the last series, looking at putting additions onto North and South, and then with Central becoming a freshman building, a 9th grade building, and then smaller addition at the high school. And you notice that B1 scored well, right? There was 36 yes votes for B1. B2, B3, and B4 did not see a lot of support from the team. And so that takes us to some hybrid options. So we looked at C1, C2, E1, E1. These were different options, just looking at different grade configurations. And so in C1, we looked at 4 K4 elementaries, and then 3, 5, 8 middle schools, and then the addition at the high school. And you see that option C1 scored well. Then we looked at option C2, which again kept the same configuration of K4, 4 K4 elementary schools, but then looked at a different configuration of 5, 8, and then the freshman academy idea. So 9th grade academy at Central, and then a smaller addition at the high school. And then D1 and E1 looked at different elementary school configurations, so looking at K6s. So D1 looked at 5 K6s, which then made 2 smaller middle schools, 7, 8 middle schools, and then the addition at the high school. And then option E1 looked at K8s, and just looking at what that configuration would look like in a master plan. And so you can see from these, C1 scored well, C2 not very well, D1 scored well, and E1 didn't score well at all. So those were 12 different master plan options with all kinds of different configurations. And so, again, asked the team to debate, to have a conversation, to talk about what the impacts were of these different master plan options. And so when we walked out of the room that night, we had basically 3 master plan options that we were considering. So we kept A1, which was the full renovation master plan option. And the reason we kept that is we wanted to be able to compare and contrast that as we looked at different master planning options. We wanted to be able to look at the cost for fully renovating and putting additions onto our existing facilities against any of the new master plan options, which were the ones that scored higher coming out of that meeting. And so we kept A1, we kept C1, you see it scored well, we kept B1, which scored well, and kept B1, which was one of the ones that scored scored well, but was kind of moderate. So these were our master plan options that we took then into our next facilities meeting. So in facilities master planning committee meeting number 4, we took those facilities master plans, and then we also looked at just some tweaks to those master plans, just kind of looking at some of the different configurations and trying to understand how they worked and how they didn't work. And so one of the things that was raised during our meeting was thinking about odd number of elementaries feeding into even number of middle schools. And so, for instance, let's say at master plan option C1, you see up in the top right-hand corner, we've got 3 elementary schools, and so these would be, in this configuration, we were talking about these being 3 North elementaries, K4 elementaries, feeding into 2 North middle schools. And as we talked about that middle building and what it would look like to be a student in that middle building, right? You might be with a group of friends that you traveled through your kindergarten through 4th grade, school days, and then ultimately you guys got split and went to separate middle schools. And so as we looked at that, I think the team had some just had some questions about what that would look like, what it would look like for those students to get split up. And so that led us to looking at some additional configurations and looking at getting away from having odd number of buildings feeding into even number of buildings if it was possible. And so that led us to a series of sort of variations on the theme, if you will. And so when you look at option B1, which came out of our previous master planning meeting, we had 5 elementaries feeding into 2 middle schools, meaning again that there would have been an elementary that would have been split. We then looked at B1A, which then went to 4 elementary schools, still K5 configuration, into 2 middle schools, right? So 4 elementaries and 2 middle schools. So then we're not splitting that student population. We're not having kids that are, effectively student groups that are split across buildings. And as we looked at this from a transportation standpoint, it also seemed to make better sense. We've got a better sort of funneling, if you will, of buildings. We then looked at C1 in a similar kind of fashion where we had 3 K4 elementaries feeding into 2 5-8 middle schools. And so we looked at a C1A option that would have just 2 elementaries feeding into 2 middle schools. And then across the bottom, the south K4 would feed into a south middle school. And so that line, if you will, seemed to make sense. We then did the same thing for D1. So D1 had 5 K6 elementaries feeding into 2 middle schools. And so we looked at a D1A that just had 4 K6 buildings feeding into 2 middle schools. And so again, the exercise here, we asked the groups basically to adopt either effectively any one of the master plan options, an A, a B, a C, or a D, and then debate whether or not they valued either the C1 or the C1A option as far as which seemed to make better sense. And then asked everybody again to do the same exercise of reporting out on these and then also voting for them. And so I had some very good discussion at this meeting, and we spent probably 45 minutes talking through the different configurations. Again, put everything up on the walls. We had site plans with us and showed how different sites, what their capacities could be and where these facilities could potentially be located if we were looking at renovating or adding on to or building new in any of those configurations. We had site plans to support those. And so when we came out of that meeting, the almost unanimous support landed on C1A. And so in looking at C1A, that configuration is 2 North K4 elementary schools that feed into 2 new 5-8 middle schools, and then 1 K4 South elementary school that feeds into 1 South 5-8 middle school. And then again, obviously, whatever required addition is necessary at the high school. And so I think we probably had 25 or 30 at that group. We almost had unanimous vote. I think there was maybe only 1 or 2 that voted for any of the other options. So as I come to you tonight and bring a recommendation that we've heard from your facilities master planning committee, the recommendation as we reviewed it, one of the questions that we also asked the group is to think about what made first as far as segmenting. If we should move forward first with K4, if should we move forward first with 5-8, the high school addition, if the funding was available, should it be part of the next segment of segment 2, or should it be part of a future segment? And the recommendation that came down was to think about the middle schools first, to take a look at them, and ultimately to go to a 5-8 middle school configuration, which then would pull a grade out of the existing elementaries and allow for some freedom, if you will, to free up some classroom space. And so as we looked at that, we looked at a configuration of having 2 new North 5-8 buildings and 1 new South 5-8 building to be a part of this segment. And then ultimately the high school addition, if the commission could come up with the state share, if they were able to come up with their portion of the state share for the high school addition, the recommendation was to do that now, understanding about the impacts, obviously, of the number of students that we're dealing with at the high school. And so the next couple of slides, I've talked a little bit about just some additional considerations that I think this master plan option affords you. So ultimately, John, going back to our original conversation, you're going to reevaluate your elementary schools again, right, when you get to the future segment. And so it gives you an opportunity to take a look at the enrollment, what the enrollment's doing at that point. If that ultimately pushes off 5 years down the road, if it pushes off longer than that, you have an opportunity to reevaluate your elementary school configurations. And if the enrollment should significantly change, increase, move in some fashion, this would allow you that opportunity to think about, we came up with a master plan option. It said 3 elementaries, or now that we have enough enrollment to support additional elementaries. We can also consider what preschool looks like in the future. So if you choose not to stay with a central preschool model, if you choose to go to a distributed preschool, that would give you the option to think about moving preschool into these buildings as they're being considered in the next master plan phase. And so obviously I'm here with dollars. These dollars were good as of Monday. They're going to be reevaluated as we go through this process. Because again, obviously the high school edition, we're going to continue to make sure that we've got the right information on the high school edition. I believe that the elementary school monies and middle school monies are correct as far as what we know today. We don't see anything that tells us that those numbers are going to change as we move forward in developing the final agreement. But I do anticipate that high school edition is potentially going to become smaller. And ultimately, we still are waiting to hear whether or not the commission has enough state share to help you with both the 5-8 the 5-8 buildings and the high school edition. It's possible that they won't be able to support you with that they can only do the 5-8s with you at this time. We're still waiting to hear back on that. And I think ultimately we've got to land on whether or not we've got to land on confirming the career tech impact first, right? And then understanding the exact cost of that addition. And then that'll tell us probably whether or not the state can help support that addition in this segment 2. So as you look at the numbers on the side, I will update this obviously once we have a full understanding of the high school edition. But where we were as of Monday was that this would have been, your abatement and demolition for your existing middle schools. Again, that's an allowance. There's no requirement for you to abate or demolish any of your facilities. You can keep your facilities. You can opt to sell those facilities, anything that you want to do in that regard. It's just the state is putting an allowance together for that so that they can assist you with their state share on that if you choose to move forward. The 3 new middle schools, and then where the addition was on the high school as of earlier this week. And then you can see the breakout of the state and local shares at 53-47. And then again, still to be determined is we need to focus in on our local funded initiatives budget, which again comes down to our sites and some of our impacts that we just want to make sure to confirm between now and the finalization of that. And then the last piece obviously is determining whether or not OFCC can fully help you with the high school edition. So the next set of slides were those site investigations that we shared with the team. And so we wanted to make sure that we at least had a strategy for where these buildings would be located and how they potentially could be built in this next segment. And so if you look at segment 2, so we've got the 2 new north middle schools and the 1 south middle school. And so our recommendation as we looked at it was to start by considering Sedalia and North Middle School as one new middle school site, to consider the No Bixby site as a potential for a new middle school, and then to take a look at the South Middle School site with Glendenning as a potential location for a new South Middle School. And so part of the reasoning behind our strategy here is, again, thinking about the floodplain impacts and what can be built without impacting our students currently, right? So we're trying to find areas where construction can happen with as minimal impact on our existing operations as possible. And so, obviously we have a significant portion of land at the existing South Middle School in Glendenning. And so as we looked at this, we considered building a new middle school behind the existing South Middle School. And then as you look at the possibility of a new South Elementary going on that site, there is the ability to build behind Glendenning, which would be in our future segment, right? So that would be part of our future consideration. As we look at the No Bixby site, we believe the No Bixby site can support a new middle school. Bless you. And so that would be a consideration for that. I know that there's been some questions raised about the fact that there just isn't a good network of sidewalks and some site access at that site. There is a $300,000 budget that's included as part of your OFCC project that is strictly for site access. And so we could do some work to not only put in some turn lanes and some ability to get into that site, but also potentially put in at least a little bit of a network of sidewalks that would help support that. I'm not advocating that you're going to create a network of sidewalks throughout the neighborhood. The dollars aren't there to do that. But at least you could start to put together the spurs of what could be something that could be continued by the community. So there's some opportunity there. And then the tough one, obviously, is at Middle School North and at Sedalia. And so this one, again, we got into the strategy a little bit earlier in the presentation, but the idea here is really about swapping land, right? We've got so much land that's in the floodplain and so much of it that's out. And so the strategy would be, you raise up the field behind the existing North Middle School, raise that field up, which then brings it out of the floodplain. We build our new facility. Then you take the old middle school down and you potentially drop that back into the floodplain, and that can become parking lots or play fields, right? And so we're swapping land out. We're also going to end up with a detention basin somewhere on the site, and so that helps us with some capacity, right? And then as we're thinking about taking North Middle School down, we could be using that soil and stockpiling that could ultimately become the footprint of our new North Elementary School. And so there's the possibility of doing some of those kinds of things. The timing of all that would be critical, right? Because there's only going to be a certain amount of time that you're going to be allowed to sort of play with that floodplain. And so we're trying to understand that. I've got a civil engineer that's looking into giving us some recommendations on that. And for these two sites, I would be recommending that we put some local funded initiative dollars into our budget to be able to support if there's some additional soils costs for this site. I don't know what the impact of that is yet. I'm hoping that it's in the $100,000 to $200,000 range, not the $1 million range. So we're looking into that, and it's going to come down to how much soil we believe we need to import in order to do this work.
Can you bring soil into the floodplain?
We can if we're switching it out, right? So ultimately, if we're building up in the floodplain, we're then going to be lowering another section to be able to trade that off. And so the key is going to become what the timing is on that, what we're allowed to do through the Corps of Engineers. And then ultimately about how, again, if we build a detention basin over here and we drop that land down, we're creating flood capacity. Then we build up our building, we build the building, and we drop the old building down and put it back in the floodplain, and I think we're trading out capacity.
And what's the cost of the additions on these buildings, or renovations of these buildings by adding another story? Was that considered in comparison to the cost of building up the property that obviously would need to be?
It was not. To my knowledge, these buildings were not designed to be able to be added on to be able to put a second story on any of these buildings. All of that would have needed to be considered when they were originally built. So we would be going in with a secondary structural system to be able to do that. And I think that would be.
Do you ever design where there's borrow pits?
Oh, yeah.
Are there bodies of water on some of the schools you design?
Oh yeah, definitely. We have detention basins and retention basins and ponds.
You spend some time on taking it?
Yeah, often. Yeah, our goal would be to get to, to where you're retaining, not detaining. What we typically like to design is what we call a dry pond, right? When you get a really heavy rain, it floods for maybe 48 hours and then it draws back down. Naturally, that would be our goal. But we have sites where we've had to put ponds in order to, take on the water table. So we have solutions like that.
And was, the roadways taken into consideration with the addition of what, 650 additional students for the neighborhood there?
We have taken a look at that, and I would say that we're still investigating that. But we do have some site safety allowances, so there are some things that we can do to widen roadways that are leading to your school buildings. And so there's some dollars already built into the co-funded budget to do those kinds of things, especially specifically on your site. And if we feel like there's any areas where we need to do additional widening that's off your site, that would be local funded initiative dollars that we will try to build in. And then the last piece obviously is looking at the high school. And again, these numbers are going to change. So I'm showing you a snapshot of what we understood as of Monday. But ultimately, if we are looking at some addition that involves career tech space plus academic space, we believe that there's capacity in sort of two areas where we could effectively touch the building. And so one is sort of back by the stadium where, and I sort of envision the opportunity of expanding the student dining within the existing building's footprint. So taking over some of the sort of storage and wrestling area that's sort of adjacent to the existing student dining to build capacity, and then potentially replacing that in whatever addition we put onto the building. And along with whatever additional career tech space we may need to include in as part of the facility. And then ultimately looking at some size of two-story classroom wing that would potentially come out of the front of the building. And what we understand today is that there was consideration for keeping utilities out of this zone, if you will. And I'm trying to circle this on the screen with my cursor, but in this zone of trying to potentially here, that area we believe currently doesn't contain utilities that need to be moved effectively, so that cost and some of the building footprint costs has probably been started there. We haven't seen any as-built that seem to indicate that there are foundations in place. I haven't seen that information, but we'll continue to look for it.
And would this addition be adding to the congestion of the circle area, what do they call that? The one they complain about a lot, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we are going to have to look for ways inside the building to try and alleviate that. I think from our perspective, one of the main things we were trying to do is to whatever this addition ultimately looks like is to get it on its own circulation path as much as possible, so that we're not, sort of bringing those students off one end of the classroom wing that's already overpopulated, right? And so we're going to be looking to see what that final impact is once we land on what the final addition size is.
Was there ever part of this plan the idea of we'll say there's the three crosses, if you will, sticking out, just connecting those together? Was that not part of the original idea when it came to adding on, or not?
I can't speak to that. I wasn't part of the original building design. I haven't seen anything that indicates that.
The only original plan was the option of the wing closest to Hamilton Road, the wing where the new yellow is. So at the end of that was to add 4 classrooms, 2 on the ground level, 2 on the second story. From the original. And that's where we talked about
Very small addition.
Yeah, and that's where we talked about some of the foundation work and other things that have been done to plan for that. Correct.
Yeah, the issue that we run into, this happens frequently on OFCC projects, is that we're always asked as architects to show how we can at least increase capacity on the facility. So if you look at any building floor plan that's been taken through the OFCC process, there's traditionally at least some understanding on the site to say, here's how we add 100 students, 200 students, which is exactly what you're describing, right? It's effectively, again, going back to 25-1, if it was 4 classrooms, first floor, second floor, that would have added 200 student capacity. Obviously, what we're talking about with this addition is significantly larger, right? And I think in some regard, this is a reflection of the fact that the commission understood that the population that hit the building on day one didn't match the square footage, right? And so we're still in that process of making up for the first round of error and now trying to appreciate that and calculate correctly for that.
Josh, I have a question, because I wasn't here.
Yep.
So when you talk about the wing that's coming, not that wing, but the wing that's closest to Hamilton Road,
Yep, this guy.
that way.
Yep.
It's 4 classrooms.
Yep.
So it's 8 classrooms total.
No, it was only planned for 4 additional classrooms total.
So just
That's my
two and
We
question.
two.
tried to add that at the time with we were $2.whatever million under budget. And we tried to, before the thing was closed out and OFCC declined to do that, we went down to their offices and appealed it. And Libby knows, we fought throughout that, we have even continued to this point, but their answer was to do it there. So, and I don't know if there's utilities at the end of that wing, because that's where some of the foundation work was done, to get ready for that expansion.
When you mean foundation, there's foundation work done at that end of that wing?
Correct.
The building's already built there, is what you're saying. You're talking about adding
No.
on to interior part of the building?
No, actually add 4 classrooms out beyond that wing of the
Where
building.
the yellow is extended.
And not exactly, I mean, if that wing, the T on the end of that would extend out just a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
after that.
Right here. Yeah.
But
You're saying there's a foundation under the dirt there?
There was foundation work done, correct, yes.
No, we talked to the architect today, didn't we? Did I look at it? There's nothing in there. We looked at the site plans too,
No, that's incorrect.
and the structural.
Was that?
That's not correct. There were structural things done. And the HVAC system was upsized.
Could you send me that information, send me those plans from the original building, after this meeting, please? Thank you.
Can you all share what you have as well? The architect that you spoke with and the plans you have, since you reached out to them, would you share that with the board, please? I can repeat it. You mentioned that you called the architect today.
We're talking to, we're talking to Josh, weren't we?
Yeah,
Yeah, we're talking to Josh, right?
yeah, we spoke and I indicated that I haven't seen any as-bills, so that's all. Ultimately, that's the only information we were.
There were structural piers put in when they were doing the rest of the foundation work. And the HVAC system was increased in size
Yeah.
and additional capacity. I'm sorry?
We know the sizing of the piping and all that.
Yeah.
So,
But structural piers out there in the ground, yes.
then they owe you a lot of money on the drawings, I guess.
Okay?
They're not on the drawings.
If they're not on the drawing, I can guarantee you, if they're not on the drawing, they didn't do it, because they're not gonna do something that they weren't on the drawings to do.
Would we like to get a lunch on that?
Was it a GeoPure system?
I don't know the specifics. I know that they said when the RAM, whatever, to put them in the big piers, they said it's cost, they did it when the equipment was out there. They put those in, and those are the 2 sizes that plumbing and electrical could be done after the fact, because that's easy to do, but the piers for the foundation were put in, and the HVAC system was oversized to handle 4 additional classrooms.
And I'll confirm that, because what I think you're describing is that they effectively they took GeoPiers out further than the footprint of the building, which is soil stabilization, right? Effectively what they were doing was building a building pad that's probably sitting underneath the topsoil and the soil that's out there, which then means that we have a pad to start that we could build over top of. The challenge that we were looking at is it's one thing to add 4 classrooms onto the end of the wing. If we're adding a significant load, right, we were looking for an opportunity to not necessarily run all those students right back down that hallway. And
I get that this isn't big enough for what we're talking about, but I just factually, that is true, that was the case.
we'll do some investigation into that, because I think I know exactly what you described. It's good information. I'm going to proceed forward just with the future segment very quickly. We did talk about the opportunity for where 3 new elementary sites potentially could happen. And so these had options associated with them. Understanding that there could be different impacts, obviously, in looking at this as a future segment. And so, one of our sites was at Dunlow. One would be at Sedalia as we're doing the North Middle School work. We sort of talked about that. A second option there for North Elementary could be either at Independence Village site or at a new site if the district chose to look at land purchase. And in the South Elementary, we were looking at the possibility of building behind Glendenning, which you've seen in a graphic of that. And then our second option was the possibility of staying at Groveport and building out behind the elementary in the ball fields. And so we've looked at the Glendenning site. You've seen this one. We looked at Groveport Elementary. Obviously, there's quite a bit of room there where the baseball fields are located. So there's the opportunity of building a new facility, a 2-story facility out there. We did look at Independence Village, and I know this has come up a couple of times. Independence Village can support an elementary school. Independence Village, I think, is a challenge when we start talking about looking at other grades at Independence Village, specifically looking at middle school. The problem with Independence Village is that the site will support a building, but there's not a lot of room to do all the other things, right? So from parking, by the time we get parking lot in, we get drop off in, we get a bus lot drop off area. We're running out of room to put a field. We're running out of room to put baseball diamonds. And so I recognize, obviously, that the natural sort of idea is to think about the park, and to think about some relationship with the park. I think unless, as a district, you're willing to purchase the park in some way, and then ultimately become responsible for the park and it become your liability, I think that there's challenges there. I think ultimately, I don't see how a relationship where the park stays as park and then is also elementary school play or middle school play areas. I think those are challenges. So I think if there's some way of looking at securing that land, I think we can reevaluate it. But I still think it's always going to be a challenge to try and get the types of fields that are necessary to support middle school. Understanding that these aren't, I get it, these aren't our competition fields. I understand that the middle school students go to Central for competition, but just having baseball fields and a football field similar to what we have at the other middle school sites is just a challenge here. So I think it's possible to support an elementary, but I think it's a challenge when we think about any other grade.
Well, have you seen our middle school?
Yeah.
Yes. They don't have it.
But they have the land.
Right.
They have the land. They have the land for a football field. They have the land for a track. They have the land for baseball.
The elementary, it's not K through 8 anywhere else. When we discussed it, the transportation savings in a K through 8 building were about $1.3 million a year, just in busing and transportation. And this area is like a perfect 1 mile square walking. So that was advantage. But we always discussed K through 8, which would also help with the loading of the middle school. Why not K through 8?
I don't see how you support having play fields for kids and having enough room to be able to do an actual middle school configuration.
And where would the parking be? There's no parking over there.
And therefore, with this, is there other reason that this wouldn't fit the OCC model?
There's parking entrances all over the park.
Yeah,
There's parking entrances, but I live there and there's no parking. There's correct. So where would you do the parking for this building?
Well, where would there be parking on the list? You have to build parking.
I agree, but what I'm saying is I agree with the statement that a K-8 building is probably not sustainable in Independence Village.
Well, this building they're showing is for how many students? It's K through 4 for 850 to 60 students, right?
Okay.
This one here, K through 4, right? Is that what that building is, Josh?
So we were looking at the capacity as far as like square footage, and so I think if I go back, this is would probably be supporting like a 500 student elementary school building. So somewhere in that range.
The ones on the master plan that you're ultimately looking at right now with the,
Yeah, it would be.
with the 3 elementary schools and the 3.
Yeah, that is correct.
That would be 866, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, for elementary. Yep.
So if it was a K through 8, that was for 500 students, which is what the project, we heard, didn't know what the projected number was of the amount of K through 8 in that area. And that would be the 1.5 million transportation. So that would be a smaller school, right, 1.3, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. 706.
Yeah, for middle school.
It's 706.
Well, that's the one, the K through 8's not on any of these. It's just an odd, it's just something, John had already talked about when possibly looking at, right?
Yeah, the K through 8 was,
And that would be about 500
550,
students,
something
which
like
would be
that.
smaller than the school building that's being shown right now.
So for your recommendation, just so I'm clear, what are you recommending? I know you're showing
What-
multiple items, what is down to brass tacks exactly, what is the recommendation?
Yeah, so the recommendation is that, that we would look at Independence Village in the future segment. Okay, so it wouldn't be under consideration for our segment 2, which is looking at our middle schools.
Okay,
In addition to the high school, it would be looked at in a future segment for a potential elementary school segment.
okay. And so we would pretty much, like you said, you could do it now, and again and again.
Yeah.
So this would be a part of it again, go through the whole process again, and this could possibly change again, but if that's the case.
Yes.
Once we get closer to that time, to look at the future segment portion of
Yes,
the
ma'am.
master plan.
That's correct.
Thank you.
As far as grade configuration options, which honestly, I was a little surprised to see all the mixing and the changes in the grade configuration. It appears here that the K-5 middle school, high school, option B was the most popular. In other words, looks like keeping the K-5 grade configuration is one of the most popular options.
It was in in our third facilities team meeting, and then in the fourth meeting, it did not receive as many votes. The C option received more votes. And so that's where we landed on the
And so
recommendation.
when I look, what I don't understand is even if you were looking at option B1, why would you do 800 and 800 knowing that middle school south is really only needing, 450 kids? Why would you not have a big middle school in the north and a small middle school in the south with the population being what it is?
I'm sorry, you were looking at B1, is that correct?
Well, any option that we look at, I know you have the 3 buildings, which changes things, the 3 middle schools. So one thought is, not too many years ago, that was proposed all 3 grades in one building, so that was 1,500 student middle schools. But now we're seeing two or 3 middle schools. But why would we do an even split when the population is so weighted to the north that you're gonna waste money on busing, getting what you call skittles, getting the population over to middle school south when they don't live there?
So I think when we landed on C1, one of the reasons for thinking about C1 is sort of looking at the split of South. And so when you look at the South numbers effectively, we were sort of operating on the idea that the South population is sitting between 1,400 and 1,500 students in K-8. And so that configuration, as we talked with the teams, they came back to that time and time again, thinking that that configuration did well for the South side of the district in taking on that population. And then we talked about different ways of taking on the North population. That was what happened between C1 and C1A.
Right, but if you kept, I'm just wanting this to be understood from my perspective. If you kept the 6, 7, 8 configuration, right, and you built the right size middle school on where middle school north is now, middle school south wouldn't even need to be touched because there'd only be 450 kids left there.
I understand your comment. I think the group, as they looked at this, thought at length about the idea of bringing 5th grade up into the middle schools in order to alleviate some of the enrollment pressures at the elementaries. And so in thinking about that, they looked at it and said, you know what, if you lead with these 5A buildings,
Yeah.
Then we pull capacity out of the elementaries, we alleviate some of the overcrowding, alleviate the need for some of our modular classrooms and those kinds of things.
And even with that mindset, a K-5 in Independence, small school, would eliminate that, and then you could actually solve this with 2 buildings. Phase 1 could easily be solved with a bigger middle school and a K-5 in Independence that would pay for itself in 15 years in transportation, roughly. So.
One thing I'm not quite following is how we jumped from 519 student elementary schools to 866.
And so,
And that's like a big jump, and those are neighborhoods that it just doesn't seem like they're going to support that or the neighborhood. So how many community members were at these meetings?
probably only a handful, unfortunately.
Could you repeat that, please?
Probably only a handful, unfortunately. So I'm gonna finish up on the future segment, and I'll show you some information very quickly about our follow-up. So again, multiple options for the future segment for the elementaries. We looked at a number of different potential sites, of which we felt could support the elementaries of the size that we were considering. And so to take a look at the follow-up, we've talked at length about this tonight in regards to the floodplain. So obviously there's a strategy that needs to be considered for the floodplain at North and Sedalia. And thinking about the impact of that and ultimately how that can be done in a fashion that minimizes the local funded initiative impact. Obviously, we've got to talk more at length about the tie-ins of whatever the addition, the final size of the addition ultimately ends up being. Thinking about how that ties into the existing building, now understanding that there's some soils work that's been done already, and see if we can't take advantage of that as well. And then we did take some time to think about the actual spaces that would be provided in these new facilities. And so what you're seeing here, effectively, when we start a project and we are working through the master planning, we'll often go ahead and run a program for the building and take a look at the spaces that are associated with that program. And so what you're seeing here, this is basically a kit of parts of all the spaces that would be associated with, for instance, this is segment 2. So this is looking at one of the new 5-8 buildings for 706 students. And what our focus here is to determine whether or not we've got the budget to support the support that's necessary in these facilities and get the types of spaces that we heard the educators struggling with at the existing facilities. And so my goal here is not to lay out a building or design a building. What I'm really doing is verification. Okay, I want to leave the room for the architects and the educators to go through the design process and think about how these buildings would really come together in new facilities. But what I have to do is I have to say, do I need to include local funded initiative dollars if we aren't able to get some sort of support spaces or get enough special needs program spaces or just in general get enough classroom spaces? And so I encourage you, if you want to, you can get in and kind of drill down in and take a look at all the different space templates that are here. But when my main focus really was in looking at classrooms and looking at learning communities. And again, I'm not designing the learning community right now, but what I'm thinking about is making sure that it can function and be supported. And so what you're seeing here is based on the population for the 5-6 and the 7-8, we would have a similar configuration where there would be a multitude of classrooms. And so for instance, let's imagine that on the left-hand side of the top diagram is 5th grade and on the right-hand side is 6th grade. Each grade would be supported with regular sized classrooms plus at least 2 larger classrooms that could function as science classrooms. And then a series of support spaces, the light purple being a special needs 600 square foot classroom, The two smaller purple being small group support spaces. This other adjacent space would be an extended learning area. And then also looking at potentially pulling in some distributed media center space. And then seeing the mirror of that obviously in the 6th grade. And so what you can quickly see is that the program for these facilities will allow us to have those types of support spaces adjacent to the learning communities. And so, you know, again, as I went through the elementaries and I went through the middle schools, I heard again and again and again from the educators about the struggle to be able to have those support spaces close to where the learning is happening, right? And not having students having to travel halfway across the building in order to get to the type of support that they need. And so this would provide those opportunities for quick individual pullout, for small group instruction right there in that learning community. And if you imagine, these learning communities don't have to be double loaded corridors, they can be pushed together so that that support space is all right there in the middle. So there's a lot of different ways that this configuration could be considered. But as I look at this, and as we discussed it with the team, I believe that the program supports the educational delivery and the challenges, it overcomes the challenges that I think I was hearing from your educators today. So I think there's an opportunity here, and what I guess my recommendation is that I don't believe that we need local funded initiative for more square footage. I think that the program that we're looking at for the building of this size is going to support what you need to do or what you want to do from an educational standpoint. And this, again, all of this is flexible. You guys are going to have an opportunity as you go through the design process to really push and pull this. This is just my first stab, and as far as my first stab is concerned, I feel pretty confident. And so likewise, we did the same thing, obviously, for the future phase of the new PK4s. And in these, I also looked at these in regards to the possibility of bringing preschool to these buildings. And so there is an opportunity, again, if you look in the kindergarten spaces, I have us programmed out for enough space to support kindergarten, and then also for the possibility of doing 2 preschool wings as part of these facilities. So you could look at going away from centralized preschool in the future if you chose to do that. And again, if your enrollment continues on the path that it appears to be. And likewise for these at 1st and 2nd grade, again, you can see the types of support spaces that would be shared between these 2 learning communities. Teacher prep rooms and instructional material storage, and then 600 square foot, 600 square foot special needs spaces, extended learning, distributed media center space that all can be taken advantage of by both of those learning communities. So I think there's good opportunity here and good flexibility for you as you take this again from planning into design. I think there's plenty of space to be able to manipulate to work for the district. So those were our follow-ups. That's what we were working on between the last meeting and tonight. And so the next steps, just have sort of 4 things listed here that are the things that would be taking place in the next sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Tonight is really about passing the resolution to allow the superintendent to continue to work with OFCC and communicate the master plan so that ultimately they can put together what's called the Notice of Conditional Approval, the NOCA package. And then that would be for segment 2. And that would be based on the recommendation from your facilities master planning committee. Ultimately, that allows for us to proceed forward to continue working on the career tech numbers, to continue to lay down the budgets and to confirm the budgets. And so it just continues this along the path. Next up, we've got a finance team meeting scheduled for next week where we'll start to confirm the final co-funded costs and the local funded initiative costs. And then in late May or early June, you're going to get the NOCA package. And you're going to be able to review that package. And again, it's going to have every student identified down to the last enrollment. It's going to have every dollar and penny identified between the states and local shares for segment 2, and then obviously for the future segment. And then ultimately your finance team, your administration team, and the board need to decide on the timing of securing your local share, if that's through a bond issue or through some other means.
So we're looking at approving option C1A, right? Is that what we're, okay. So Mr. Treasurer, could you add up the 3 elementary schools that were on there, 834, 834, and 809, and then divide them by the number of classes and tell me what you Number of students.
834, 834, what was the other number?
It's 834, and 809. And I believe that's
24/7.
K through 4, so divide by 5. And,
About 500, 495.
yeah, so congratulations, it's like the high school all over again. We have classes of 525, and we're building buildings for 495. So that's we're not ready. The number's not right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Are there any questions for?
Can I ask a clarifying question? Just to understand what you're saying. Are you saying that for, take the total number of students, divide by the grades, and that's how many classes we will have?
I'm saying that those 3 buildings put us 150 students short of our typical population.
The total of K4 is, I'm not
K
understanding.
through 4, as he did the math, we're saying our class sizes are 495 a class in the month. We're at 5 and a quarter, we're projecting to be big. So again, we're starting at a base that appears to me to be 150 students short, 50 students per building or something like that short.
So going back to the enrollment projections, you got K at 443, first grade at 518, second grade at 529, third grade at 460, fourth grade at 478. That's now. But in the future, in 10 years out, like I said in here, all those grades are going to increase only by like 60 kids, right? So I get your point where 500 kids, the average of those is 500 kids. Even 10 years
I
out.
wouldn't, I mean, if you're projecting growth, I definitely wouldn't be cutting it like that. That is tight.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go
Yeah.
from a number, say,
That's
that's
not building to, we're easily building and then we're gonna be like, oh, I'm sorry, and put modulars out back.
So
well,
maybe it's just unclear, this is based off the OSCC model, correct, in order to receive their funding share.
Yeah, and I would,
Make sure
yeah, I would say the other thing too, if you remember the presentations from Cropper back in, 2022, 2023, they showed that your enrollment has sort of an unusual bell curve to it, right? That your elementary schools capacities get sort of hot in the middle of the next 10-year projection, and then they start to kind of release, is the way I would describe it. And so they start to drop in capacity in the capacity of the students, and the students move down into the middle schools, and then the middle schools get over capacity, right? And so as they looked at that, we can go back and look at that diagram, but effectively they are projecting that you peak in your elementary school grades, and then you start to come back down a little bit over the next 10 years. And that your middle schools peak after that, right? As the students move down into the middle school grades, then the middle schools peak. And so then there's a shorter window of peak on the middle schools, and then obviously the high school is projected as being over capacity into the next 10 years. So I think that your enrollment specialist that you hired, your third-party enrollment specialist, identified that. They identified that window. They identified the sort of bell curve to that. And they do believe that you're going to be under 500 students a grade in your elementary schools as you get out to the 10-year period.
And they believe 1,440 is good.
I don't believe they would vote. Yeah.
Future thing.
So also, this plan is abandoning the Main Street schools so those kids won't be able to walk anymore and no need to be bused. Do we have projections on the cost of that busing too? Of all the additional busing do we have, that's not figured into your projections at all, right?
Not yet, that's correct.
And this plan is abandoning our Main Street property, schools. Correct? Because we're putting the north schools in, south schools in Glendenning area, right? That's putting them in the Glendenning.
Yeah,
That would be abandoning those.
Yeah, because we have South Elementary School at 392. There's no other elementary school in South.
They're showing that the possibility of having an elementary school behind the current elementary school.
That's correct. It goes in.
So you wouldn't be abandoning that property?
Explain that to me again. So,
They'd be putting, here's Groveport Elementary, they're talking, putting in Groveport Elementary there.
Possibly, but possible now.
And remember, this is only future, so again, we would have to then do this process again. The primary focus is the segment 2, if I'm understanding you correctly in the process, that's the primary focus. And then again, you still have to provide all the information to OCC, but we will be doing this exact same process again when we look at the future segment next. So that could change again, so that is why it's a possibly enrollment can change between the buildings as well. Floodplain, apparently flood zones change all the time, so what we thought we were gonna put something somewhere, we may have to move, and all your pretty drawings will have to change yet again. So I just want us to kind of keep that in perspective, this is as close as what we can be with the mean and the OCC model to at least get, which is the primary focus of that segment 2, which would take care of those middle schools in that addition for the high school, if I'm understanding correctly, and those that may be watching on YouTube.
That's correct.
Okay, so we've got that, I think there's some questions or some needs, and maybe if we could, Mr. Collier, still map out kind of those dollars for busing and such, just so we have that in mind, even though that is gonna be a later part of the project. I think that would be great to have that, so we kind of have that in mind, and then when it's time to reevaluate, all those documents are readily available when we do this process yet again.
And I'd like to say, John, thanks for internal questions, so thoroughly, I really do appreciate all your time and everything. And I don't think dollar amounts is something that should be in the future, that should be, we should know that now. So I just agree with that.
Okay, well, thank you.
Can I ask one question, because for pure finance thing, because I did this project back in 2005, so come on. So let's say this passes and we take this to the voters in November, because if it passes now, we have 18 months, right? I'm just trying to get my head around this, so if I have questions.
You have 3 opportunities, so it'll be
November, May, November.
Yep.
Okay, so let's say it doesn't pass at all. Because right now we're number 1 on OFCC's list. What happens if it doesn't pass? Or, or we never get, you know what I mean? Like, do we go off of this, or do we go back down, or like, this, my thing is I want that 53% share, right? But yeah, explain it.
Yeah,
just for me and maybe for the board too, because it's been a long time since.
If you're unsuccessful in securing your local share, then you ultimately at the end of your three attempts, you would go into what's called a lapsed district category, which means that then the state will wait until you secure your local share before they will secure their state share. So for instance, if you went a year down the road, you would need to go out, get your bond issue, go out, be successful, get your local share. You would notify the commission that you were going to do that. And then they would bring their state share once you had your local share secured as a lapsed district. So you don't lose your place in line, but what they're basically saying is instead of us coming and offering you funds, we're now going to take our funds and work with someone else. And once you're able to secure your money, we'll come back to you, but there would be no guarantee in what calendar year. So
What that mean, that no calendar?
So let's say that let's say you push out to May of 25, or no, I'm sorry, let's push even further out. Let's go to November 26. Let's say that in November 26 you're successful and you are able to get your local share at that time. There's no guarantee that they would have their money for you in 27. They may have already allocated their funds, so it could push out to 28, or it could push out to further than that. And so there's just no guarantee of when they're able to get you back into their budget. And it ultimately puts the pressure on the district to secure the local share.
So does that mean that we're collecting the dollars even though we're not building? And does it go into a?
That's possible. Yes, it's possible. It could be an arbitrage issue. It also, one of the other things to consider is the impact of inflation, right? Ultimately, all these dollar amounts would have to be adjusted to whatever the most up-to-date cost set would be. And the other thing I think is important to consider, and we should talk about it tonight, is that let's say that we proceed forward and you decide to go ahead and accept the offer of funding, go through the notice of conditional approval, and you decide to go on in November. In November, you're playing with a dollar and a dollar, right? Your dollar counts as a full dollar. In May of next year, your dollar is not as valuable anymore, right? And so ultimately, we've now gone 5-6 months, and now whatever inflation is done over 5 or 6 months, our dollar now might be worth 95 cents. And then if we're not successful in May and we're in November of 25, now our dollar is probably worth 90 cents, maybe 89 cents. And so what happens is that your project becomes a little bit more challenging to make the budgets work. And so part of our position, or part of our job to work with you on, is to make sure that we've got some local funded initiative monies to be able to help offset that. And so we will be working with the finance team to say, okay, what's a comfortable amount to make sure that we have some money in there to protect ourselves. That's really what it comes down to.
So, given that we didn't get overwhelming public input, so when we go and we say we're hitting this to the voters as soon as possible, and then if it didn't pass, and we got feedback from that process, right? Then is it still possible to move forward with other options, or are you locked into this C1 is it, and you're locked in, or can you take feedback if you get any that seems significant, and are you able to adjust?
It's a good question. Your project is going to go, if we continue along this path, your project's going to go in front of the commission in July, and then it's going to go to the controlling board in August. And so that project is the project that they're going to be approving, right? And so ultimately, if you're making a change to that project, then you would probably have to circle back to the commission in July of 2025 to ask them for an updated project agreement, or an amendment, I should say. I believe it's possible. I can't tell you that I know an example where we've done that. Thank you.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and we have additional information, I told him thank you. All right, on to
I
item.
think that we take a 5-minute recess.
It's been, do a motion on the floor
For 5 minutes.
do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we have a roll call, Mr. Treasurer.
Mrs. Ettelberg?
Aye.
Mrs. Dyer?
Aye.
Mrs. Gray?
Aye.
Mr. Christian?
No.
Mrs. Walsh?
Aye.
5 minutes,
And
10:31.
we, motion passes. All right, we have 5 minutes.
Who was second on that?
It was 7.
Flood your head with too much info? Ram and aggregate heaters, sounds, that's what I did. We've done that on projects before. Fiber ends, ground down into the ground into a cage. What they did is they overbuilt the footprint, right?
Mhm.
So that's all sitting underneath there. So it needs to be drained. So it's not, we're using the term, it's not, we shouldn't be using the foundation. It's technically soil.
Average person.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right.
Foundation.
It's not that you weren't here.
They didn't pour.
That's why I'm getting some sediment.
They just overbuilt the building pattern.
Well, meetings are killing me.
Money to spend.
lot of information. Sorry. No, it's good.
I'm gonna bring it here from now on.
It is chilly, isn't it? It is a little, it is a little on the chilly side.
Right there. Because at one point in our process was this, and a few weeks later, it's something else.
7.8%. We're not good. I'll tell you, the thing that's really scary is that,
You want to go to
based on
water?
the cost on tiles, right? So you guys are in zero cost. When you get out here, not only did it go up 7.8%, it also probably went up 12% on top of that because of inflation. So,
It's more expensive to buy as a percent travel.
yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you know, we've got a bunch of construction managers.
I'm talking about this.
Then it gets spotty. Right? So if you go out, east, you go out southwest. Or south. Thank you.
You know, I know it came late in the process, which it has to, but that, the classroom blocks really helps me understand the safety. And that's why I asked me a question, like labs and things like that, there's some things that it's just identified, it's like a placeholder of square footage. And when you do the design, you know what's gonna happen.
And there's the high school program, that's why we get a lot of in, because, you know, right now. The private spaces, the living spaces, the section over here, I think he loves that one. Yeah. Let's stick around with it.
Well, you need to know about the, You're too young. You're too young. Don't thank me.
I'm not thinking you. That's right. You're fine. Bad guy.
Everybody ready? Everybody ready? Time is 10:35. We return from recess. On to board item F. We have the first read of the LSBA policy IGBEA-R. And I don't know if this is at least you want me
It's a board item. It was kind of for some discussion tonight, but based on our previous meeting, I almost feel like this should be tabled and brought back another time.
This is the first reading.
Just a tissue, Dave.
It's just the first reading. We don't vote until. Just the first read, so if there's any questions, please let me know so I can coordinate with legal counsel on one policy that is specific to our request, from the previous board rather. And then with the other policy, we can, that is required as is because the law changed. Did everyone get that okay?
And yeah, all I would like to say is that when it comes back for a second read, and a vote, and for adoption, I would like them to be two separate items, not one item. Because one is a required policy, I mean, we have to have it. The other one is not. And I think there is a definite division between the two, and I would like to vote on them for adoption separately. Thank you.
Okay, in the past, we've not done that, I'll take your recommendation under consideration.
I'm sorry.
That I didn't understand. It says the name of Hazel was not in the line.
Sorry.
And the rest of them.
No,
Hazel?
I know.
That's what it says.
I'm sorry. If you would say.
oh, no, it's not, I've heard your recommendation in the past, our process is even with other policies, we had voted them all together, but I will take your recommendation in consideration, thank you.
That's what I said.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Sorry for that.
Oh, no problem, I get it, I'm trying to make sure that I'm in line so that we get everything. Item G, superintendent's agenda.
Superintendent recommends the Groveport Madison Board of Education approve the master plan recommendation of the district facilities master planning committee.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I have Ms. Gray as, first, Mr. Bauer second. We've had plenty of comment and questions, but I will open it up again, I think we can move to roll call, I want to be mindful to my colleagues.
Just really quickly, I think for spending this amount of money, I would build, conservatively, meaning making sure that we err towards enough space and not cutting it tight. And then also, one thing that disappoints me about this process is with all the options, we do not see transportation costs, which will vary drastically. And I think that was one of the advantages to starting with independence, whether you agree with that or not. But having the local schools and being able to walk to them saves a lot of money. And also, my final concern is, I would want to secure for the community of Groveport, the high school and the Groveport Elementary, and not see that potentially, fall in the hands that would demolish them. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say the chair, just, planning on right now. I'm gonna read a statement, because I do a little bit better reading, and bear with me, it might be a little long. And I would like the statement added to the meeting minutes. My fellow board members and administration, tonight, the superintendent urged the board to accept a proposal for new school buildings, new grade structures, and the expansion of the high school. The location of the new schools are offered as an option rather than a certainty. Proposals call for the district possible abandoning our school building on Main Street. Who will benefit if the district abandons these properties? Certainly not the families and children who now walk to school. The proposal comprises three new elementary schools, each with a capacity of over 860 students. Planned new middle schools with a capacity of over 700 students in order to accommodate fifth grade, and maybe two separate expansions to the high school. All existing buildings will be destroyed. And what will happen to the property when the structures are demolished? There was very little data offered to support the superintendent's recommendation, just population data. Are larger buildings away from students' neighborhoods the best choice for our students? With a 70% plus student body that is economically disadvantaged, are mega schools the best option for improving learning? These decisions beg the question of whether larger buildings will truly benefit the students, especially those who come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. By not providing evidence or data to support the superintendent's recommendation, there is cause for concern regarding the impact on student learning and success. It is essential to consider if mega schools will truly promote improved learning, or if smaller community-based schools may be more efficient option for our diverse student population. Ultimately, the focus should be on what will best support and enhance the educational experience for all students, rather than simply increase the size of our school buildings. Possible locations for new school buildings have been offered, but we have not been informed that we also have been informed that we may need to acquire land for an extra site. The cost of acquiring a new property is not included in the total amount shown. Furthermore, the expense of transporting pupils who will no longer be able to walk to school is not included in the figure offered today. These additional costs must be thoroughly analyzed and included into the decision-making process in order to properly comprehend the financial ramifications of the proposed changes. It is critical that all components of the project be properly assessed to ensure that the final product actually helps the whole student population. By using a comprehensive approach to planning and budgeting, we can build a learning environment that fulfills our kids' unique needs and prepare them for future success. This information is required before the board decides on future plans. Board policy requires public input in decision-making, and that is what we were told would happen, but that is not the case. I personally attended 2 separate community meetings that had building tours, one at Dunlow Elementary School and one at Glendon Elementary School. Neither building had a sign up at the school promoting meetings. At Glendon, the door was locked. There was no sign on the door. Eventually, somebody came to the door and let me in. Later, after we started the tour of the school, 2 other people were at the door trying to get inside. At both meetings, there were only 2 other community members. A constituent informed me that she had signed up to receive email notifications at the first meeting and never once received a notification. It was disappointing to see a lack of organization and communication at these community meetings. It is crucial for the district to ensure the information about the meetings is easily accessible and the community members and businesses are actively engaged in the decision-making process. It is clear that there is a need for improvement in how these meetings are conducted in order to foster a more inclusive and transparent dialogue between the school board and the community. These events clearly demonstrate the discouragement of public input. I now have a plan in front of me that neither of the meetings I attended included. It would be irresponsible for the board to take an action on this plan tonight. As a concerned community member and board member, I believe it is crucial for the school board to prioritize transparency and actively seek input from all stakeholders before making any decision that will impact our community. It is disheartening to see such a lack of communication and disregard for the public opinion in the decision-making process. Before moving forward with any proposal, I urge my fellow board members to direct the administration to reconsider their approach and ensure the inclusion of all voices. The administration should present the board with a comprehensive final plan that includes data and substantiates the proposed changes for our district. Only through open and inclusive dialogue can we truly work together to better the future of our schools and our community. Thank you.
Could you read that one more time?
No, I will not.
There was a lot there, and I'm not gonna try to address all of it, but a couple factual things. The larger schools are more efficient than smaller schools. That's why the state doesn't allow us to build under a certain size from an operational perspective. If you have schools in the general area where students live, we're not gonna be busing students back and forth all over here. And we did have a large population of teachers and principals and other administrators in the meeting. If there was concern about the instructional format of this proposed layout, they had every chance in the world to talk about it. I don't know what evidence you have that a K-4, 5, 6, 7, 8 building plan is not an effective thing, but you can't just say it and it's true. There's facts out there that can be used to do that. But I just wanted to set the record straight on a couple of those items. I don't have any type of a way to respond to all of that at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Thank you, Board Member Walsh. I will say as a parent, I did receive all of the emails, the social media notifications for every meeting that we had. And I know that everyone who's in time forms will get an email for that. And I think the listserv, if listserv be correct, I think it was like everybody or something like that, but we did receive multiple reminders. It'll say what's happening this week. There were several graphics that showed what was going on. It wasn't just for facilities, but would kind of list the facilities plan plus something else that's going on to kind of keep everyone in the know for the district. So I did see that for a marketing standpoint to get individuals out. I don't recall getting a robocall, but I did get several notifications through social as well as email, and I don't know if you got the same thing.
Yeah, I got the same thing.
For power being a parent.
Got the emails, it was on social media, specifically Facebook, there were several posts there.
It was
on Instagram. So yeah, I felt like it was communicated out to the public well.
No signs, the door was locked. That's all I have to say.
We appreciate that. I was just trying to give context and give our comment as well. This is not for debate. It was just to provide our comment on what we did see in thanking the administration for that piece. Not sure what else can be done, going forward. I don't know if this is what we can talk about with, our marketing person, or another survey, but we don't necessarily get the best response on surveys as well, but hopefully, we can talk about other ways, but I appreciate everyone's comment, and if we could move to roll call, Mr. Treasurer.
Mrs. Dauber.
Aye.
Mr. Bauer. Aye. Mrs. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Herschel. No. And Mrs. Walsh.
No.
Motion passes. On to item, item H, for adjournment. H1, adjournment, we have a motion, please.
Second.
Ms. Gray and Mr. Bauer. Ms. Gray's first, Mr. Bauer second. We can have roll call, Mr. Treasurer.
Mrs. Dauber.
Aye.
Mr. Bauer.
Aye.
Mrs. Gray.
Aye.
Mr. Herschel. And Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
Motion passes, the time is 10:49. This meeting is adjourned.
Well, I mean, means something different than the. It's like, so, the program. Sounds So we're good. Thanks, Josh.
Oh.